I've been there, I know.
Are all of them. Yeah, pretty much when you're
Other than giving you support. Yeah.
yeah.
They'll stand up.
Right, so Todd is missing, and Marcus. He's on there. Yeah, so there are 7 class 4 members, the mayor, council president, and the borough employees, and then there are,
You're the new council lead?
yeah.
That's just no,
Hi, Dick, how are you? I think we met shortly.
we saw, yeah. So what
do you plan?
What? Oh, most likely, I live in the township, but this is just,
The borough,
there's a building that I own at the parking lot in the borough.
mayor,
It was just, this is Hobart, Jim. Anybody, he had a building.
only up in that
Part of the land was in the town,
Well, not
part
the-
was in the township. And that's being sold, and the fact that part of it's in the town, none of the buildings, but, so that was, yeah. And they had, it was a parking lot at the time, so nothing changed, it still has that.
Got it. Yeah, I always found that township borough line, and then on the off 31 to be curious.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Making it the natural 31 boundary there, so I'm sure they had a reason when they did.
They were just farms.
We ended up driving. Congratulations. Our engineers had to run back to his office, so we're just giving this a...
So I don't have to show up.
Yeah, we have that informal, we have the informal before. Yes, I know. We might need, exactly. And starting to have. Okay. Does anybody want to see the bill for Yeah, this is the
Kick it off.
All right. This meeting is being held in conformance with the Open Public Meetings Act. All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
excused. Mrs. Pedden?
Here.
Mr. Perrin?
Here.
Mr. Budney?
Here.
Mr. Hain is excused. Ms. Tilly? Here. And Mr. Townsend is excused. Mr. Giannis?
Here.
Mr. McManus? Here. And we are waiting for Mr. Clerico and Mr. Russo.
All right, this is the Flemington Borough Planning and Zoning Board meeting for Monday, August 6th, 2018. We may shift the agenda around a little bit if we think we need, to have the engineer here until he runs back in his car. But we will start with, agenda item number 1 as listed on the agendas, if anybody needs them, they're right there on the table. For public comments, or any public comments, or, I'm trying to speak slow and delay and not even approach. All right, approval of the meeting minutes, item number 2, approval of meeting minutes from July 24th, 2018 regular meeting.
Second.
Ms. Claire?
Yes.
Mayor Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Melfi?
Yes.
Mrs. Engelhardt?
Abstain.
Mrs. Pedden? Mr. Perrin?
Yes.
Mr. Budney?
Yes.
Mrs. Tilly? Yes. Thank you.
Okay, do we need clerk or here for
Let's
the
see how it
informal?
goes.
Okay. Is that okay with the applicant?
Yeah, that's
All right. All right, so let's do the informal discussion for block 28, lot 9.
Good evening, members of the planning board. My name is Stephen Gruenberg, attorney with Scholl, Whittlesey and Gruenberg. We were last here before you in November 2017 on the Stodoff application. The property is primarily located in Raritan Township, block 33, lots 1 and 3. There's a small portion of the parking lot that's located in block 28, lot 9. It's at the intersections of Route 31 and Emery Road. When we were here the last time, it was for a letter of no interest, because all we were doing was subdividing by way of minor subdivision, an existing office building, just drawing the line. You gave us that letter of no interest. And the letter specifically says, the board sees no need to review the minor subdivision application as presented, providing that there will be no substantive changes, including but not limited to curbing and impervious coverage, to the existing parking lot on block 28, lot 9, located in the borough. The board has no objections to the restriping or the addition of landscaping as determined by any approval of the Township of Raritan Planning Board. We've had many meetings before the Raritan Township Board of Adjustment. We have a 30-page resolution with lots of conditions. One of those conditions is to come back before this board to get another letter of no interest or other approval. We're asking you for another letter of no interest. There is a minor tweak to the plan that deals with the small portion of the parking lot in Flemington Borough. I'd ask Mr. Buchner just to provide you with how that plan changed since the last time that we were here.
What I've got mounted here is the lighting plan that we submitted to the Township of Raritan. And in addition to the restriping of, this is the parking lot that we're speaking of, in addition to the restriping, there are existing lights within this parking lot. They're the old acorn style light fixtures, and we're planning to replace those lights with new, more modern LED light fixtures. These fixtures are all 100% full cutoff fixtures. House side shields are being provided along the light fixtures that are adjacent to the residents in the borough. And in essence, that's the change that we're making in addition to any landscaping and striping.
The plan that we have is improving and modernizing the lighting and making it better than what's there now, correct?
Correct.
And this has been fully vetted by Raritan Township Board of Adjustment and its professionals, correct?
Correct.
And right now, we're just trying to perfect what that approval that we got before Raritan Township, correct?
Correct.
And the vast majority of this property is located within Raritan Township.
Correct.
There's also, one of the conditions is that this small portion that's actually in the borough will be deed restricted so that the Raritan Township property and the Flemington Borough property can't be sold separate and apart from each other, correct?
Correct.
So if somebody tries to sell the part in Flemington Borough, they also have to sell to park, in Raritan Township and vice versa. Correct?
Correct. Out of curiosity, did you run the lights against our ordinance?
We did the analysis in regards to the township standards. I haven't checked it against your ordinance. We can meet, and we are meeting the 0.1 foot candle at the property lines, but the distribution within the parking lot, it's similar to the previous application, or the next application that will be heard. We have the same limitations, given the location of the fixture, the height of the fixtures, and so forth. It makes it almost impossible to meet your ordinance.
The reason why we're here before Flemington Borough is because there's the general understanding that if a project is primarily in one of the townships, the other municipality defers to the reviewing board. They just want to make
Which is
sure.
what they did for Chimney Rock with us,
Correct.
so,
So,
We do this all the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
We have a lot of properties that,
and believe me, they vetted this. They really did.
Is it safe to say that the overall illumination level is not more than it is now? Is that?
Absolutely, it's
Yes.
less
So
and
it should be
shielded light.
less
Correct.
and shielded, okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So are there any poles, sorry, from this viewpoint, are there any poles physically that are being placed on the borough, or the parcel that's located in the borough?
So we are proposing 2 new pole mounted fixtures
Those
along
two.
this side of the parking lot. I do believe, and I'll have to defer to Dick, I think they're already existing, the old acorn style fixtures within this parking area.
There are existing lighting poles and fixtures within the parking area.
Okay.
We're just modernizing what's
Okay, so
in
you're
there.
not removing a pole, putting in a new pole, you're just replacing
The fixture had, I think the
just
poles,
the fixture itself?
yeah, but I believe the poles also have to get replaced, just
Okay.
because the mounts are different.
It's all being modernized, right?
Correct.
And it's all being done to have the light focus down and shielded, correct?
Correct.
So the existing poles that are on that plan right now are there now, and the existing lights that are there right now will be replaced. And the lights that are there right now won't be any brighter than they are. The lights that are being proposed aren't any brighter than the ones that are there right now.
Correct.
Yes.
What about the spray? How does, like, the distance that the existing lights
So,
cover versus what's proposed?
so the older lights are the acorn style fixtures where once you turn them on, it's just starts lighting out everywhere. Those are the ones that you typically find in night glow because it doesn't have a mechanism, at least in those older fixtures.
When you say night glow, you mean light pollution?
Yes, because they don't have the optics or they're not designed to keep the light focused downwards.
Mhm.
These new fixtures are.
Okay, so it actually will improve as far as the night glow, the
Yes.
light pollution. And is that that meets the Raritan, standards?
Correct.
Is what you're saying. How do we?
you need a motion to.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
further
but-
action?
Hold on a minute, hold on a minute.
yeah, you should have a motion and a second, and authorize the board secretary to issue a letter of no interest.
As an informal discussion, are we allowed to have any public comments? I mean, this isn't a public thing.
It's not a public hearing, but.
But excuse me, I live on that street.
I mean, I understand this isn't allowed in public comments, but we understand that.
No, it's not a public hearing, you can do what you want, it's an informal, if you want to entertain comments from the public, go ahead.
Are you opposed to, allowing your direct neighbor to have a question?
No, Ms. Stewart participated in the Raritan Township proceedings,
Good.
and at that point,
I'm glad to hear
But
that.
no one has,
I'm calling on you, Lois, calm down. I'm calling on you, just a second, hold on. So there's no objection?
no objection.
Okay, Lois, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring to the board's attention that while there are light fixtures there is no lighting in that parking lot presently.
So the current lights are not working?
Currently, the building's not occupied, so that the lights aren't on, but those light fixtures are there.
And I would
are
assume
capable of being, and operational, capable of being turned on.
there's power to them, right?
Correct.
And I'm assuming those lights were approved in the original site plan approval, how many years ago?
I assume so. And again, this has all been thoroughly vetted before Raritan Township,
I
including
appreciate
additional
that, but-
landscaping at the request of interested parties.
Okay.
But the person who's buying the property, does not have any business activity at night. So I am very interested in making sure that the fixtures will be turned off at a early hour actually, because they are adjacent. There are houses across the street, and this parking lot is immediately adjacent to Mr. Cozy's house, and it's primarily residential.
So what does the Raritan side of the property line require as far as lights off at a certain hour? Is there any type of ordinance?
The resolution actually has a condition that the lights need to be turned off by 11 o'clock.
Okay, so there's
And
there's
again, all of these issues were dealt with.
So they're not overnight light?
Correct.
They have a,
They have a specific.
Yeah, no later than 11 p.m.
And does that meet our ordinance?
Yes.
Does that
It's
meet
all-
our ordinance as well, the 11 o'clock? Does anybody know? Or do we even have anything else? I don't, okay. All right, so
I would move
they
that,
actually have a time where we may not even have it.
That's, or at a minimum, it sounds like the board imposed a condition upon the applicant.
It was a condition imposed.
I would move that the board secretary be authorized to issue a letter of no interest on the planning board's position on block 28, lot 9, block 33, lot 1 and 3.
In regards to any lighting or improvements?
With regards to anything, I mean, we have no interest in the,
correct.
in the site plan.
Second?
Second.
Ms. Benoyer?
Yes.
Mayor Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Melfi? Mrs. Engelhardt?
Yes.
Mrs. Pedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Parent?
Yes.
Mr. Budney?
Yes.
Mrs. Tilly? Yes.
Thank you very much.
Your timing is impeccable, sir.
How so?
He's gonna have his,
Go a chance to get settled in.
lawn service here now. He rents.
Okay, we're going to be moving on to agenda item number 4, public hearing for exercise Plaza Courthouse, C, Quadrant 5, Lot 91, this is a continuation from the 24th, and, I read the minutes, and right here, I didn't get copies of the.
I sent it in the mail with the package, had everything. Yeah, there was this within.
I opened this today.
It was, I put it in within that envelope for me and for Greg.
Alright, I apologize, so I did not.
Continues again.
It doesn't matter, because we have enough, so I just wanna
Right.
let them know that I am really
I don't know how
sorry.
that got out of the
American Airlines
envelope, but.
messed up my, messed up my return trip last time, I was planning on doing that. So, but we do have enough to review, and if it's okay with you guys, we'll keep it. So whenever you're ready, John.
Might be stuck in the middle of it. I don't think I have it in now. Yeah, but if it's a moot point,
It doesn't matter, yeah. It's not your fault, I should have looked at it earlier. It was like 1 o'clock and what happened.
Madam Chair, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, good evening. My name is Donald Scholl. I represent the applicant. This is continuation from the July 24 meeting. I just noticed that Mr. Rassiola is not. We'll play that by ear.
Oh, sorry about that.
I would call Peter Cucci, if you could be sworn.
You raise your right hand, you swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I did.
First, Testify your resolution.
C-U-C-C-I.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Cucci, you may have to, go to the easel to refer to your plan. Will the mic pick up his testimony from that location, or should we move that?
I would go back to this.
I'll speak loudly, but it's more important that you hear Mr. Cucci than perhaps myself. Mr. Cucci, let me first qualify you as an expert witness. Would you please provide your educational background?
My name is Peter Cucci. My educational background is I attended the New Jersey Institute of Technology and the University of Bologna in Italy. Graduated in 1985 and received my license in 1986 in practice architecture.
So you're a licensed architect in the state of New Jersey?
That's correct.
And have you testified previously before any municipal board where you have been accepted as an expert in the field of architecture?
I've been before this board, Meriden Township, Kingwood, Bridgewater, Wayne, Newark, Patterson. I can continue.
Been here before.
Madam Chair, with your approval. Mr. Cucci, what did you review in preparation for your testimony this evening with regard to this application?
Actually, amongst my documentation, I actually reviewed the letter that was prepared by the planner. And have responses to any questions or comments that were made.
So we'll get to those. With regard to this application, did you review the site plan that was prepared by the applicant's engineer, Mr. Rutenrain?
Yes, I reviewed the site plans.
Okay, and you were in attendance on the evening of July 24 and heard the testimony of Mr. Rutenrain as well as Mr. Redmore-Terra, is that correct?
That's correct.
And with regard to this application, have you prepared an architectural plan and building elevations?
Now, I prepared plans, elevations, rendering, signage, etc.
Okay, so with the permission of the chair, we would mark his architectural plan as, I think we're up to exhibit 6.
Yes.
What would you prefer? Floor plans, or you want me to
Let's do the exterior elevation.
do rendering, or just do the elevation?
Why don't we go with the rendering? And that orients the board with regard to visually what's depicted. And you're marking that on the rear as A6. So we'll identify that then as the architectural rendering. And then, so we don't interrupt your testimony, 7 will be the elevation plan that was submitted as a part of the application.
Correct. That'll be A7. Want to do the floor plans? Might as well do them all, right? A1.0, that'll be A8.
And that's the floor plan?
That'll be the first floor plan. A9 will be the second floor plan. And A10 will be the signage and graphics.
And then 11, you did a seating plan for the patio, is that correct?
Yeah, and that's actually included on the new first floor plan,
Okay,
so, you want to note that?
please, so that's exhibit 8, first floor plan, and also patio seating?
Yeah.
So with regard to what's proposed, there's a building improvement, if you could walk the board through that, orient where that building improvement is located and what it consists of.
Actually, we have, I'll refer back to the site plan, just so we can clarify. We have the existing Lone Eagle Brewing, which is on the bottom side of the sheet, and the new improvement is here on the north side, and that's a new two-story building, consisting of 14,031 square feet on 2 floors, which the brewery side, which we know is subdivided between the 2 buildings, and the brewery side of the building is a total of 5,309.12 square feet, and the food hall side, which I'll call it, is actually 8,722.42 square feet.
You're now referring to,
Now referring to the rendering, so actually we put together 3 different sets of images, so you guys, for clarification. So we have the existing brewery, which is this small section on the bottom left-hand side, and the new building, which actually is on the right-hand side. And there's also another image of again, the brewery tipped from another direction, and also our new building, and also a direct front elevation colored showing what we propose. As simple as that.
reviewing that rendering, there was an effort, I think, to maintain some consistency and continuity in the part of the buildings.
And so part of the goal of the whole project was actually to make the new facility mimic almost identically the existing brewery, so we had continuity across the whole block or that whole area. So we have a similar arcade from building to building. We have a similar entry A feature. We have similar columns and pedestals, as well as the stone veneer which wraps around the base underneath the windows. And we actually mimic the same pattern of composite material or AZEK across the top where signage will be placed. So it's a virtual replication without, except a little larger and a few dormers.
Now, with regards to the new building, first floor will contain what, second floor will contain what?
Okay, showing the first floor plan, on the left side or the brewery side here will contain basically a canning facility, a cold room storage area, storage, some additional brew tanks for the breweries for their expansion, and a toilet for that area. And it'll actually share, and then there'll be a common kitchen which will be used by the food hall side. The food hall side, which is the right side, which is in here, will actually have one common entrance from the front and one from the rear, with exit out to the patio on the side. And this will contain various artisan food stalls, or basically it's like a food court. And actually there's 6 food court spaces identified. We may have 5, we may have 7. We're sticking with 6 right now. There'll be utility rooms and common toilets. In addition, in the back right-hand corner, there'll be an area designated for a distillery and access out to a patio area. Also in the plan, if you notice that there's along the arcade at the very end is a small porch that's 18 by 18 with a small fireplace and outdoor seating along the patio. Some questions that actually are some things that we consider looking at was, what do we want the facade to look like on that particular side based on the residential area? And so what we did, pull it up on the look a little better, is that this is the porch area. We have another little bump out to break the facade. And also we have a small stone chimney in here because we anticipate the need to have some area for exhaust ductwork, et cetera, along the outside of the building. So it's a nice way to break it up, plus disguise that equipment. It's a nice, again, a simple way to handle that.
Now, with respect to the building construction, vinyl siding, such lap, if you could just identify that for the record.
And so our plan is to mimic the same, or reuse, or use the same materials that we use for existing brewery. That means we're going to use the same Dutch lap siding in the same color, asphalt shingle roof, which will be the same color, same type and color. similar type of windows, which will be like an Anderson or a Silver Line type window, which is similar to what we used in the other facility. The stone that runs along the base will also, as close as we can match what is currently existing.
Same thing with the shingling.
The same thing, yeah, the asphalt shingles, everything across the board.
Now, with regard to the brewery side, if I can refer to it that way, and you reviewed the first floor plan, applicant exhibit 8, is there seating that's proposed?
There's no seating proposed in the brewery side.
Now, the food hall will obviously have seating, you've identified that, and I think it's important to note for the record, the patio, you've done a separate seating plan for the patio, is that correct?
We did a separate seating plan for the patio, and also it's included on this comment sheet, the same sheet that actually was distributed.
And just briefly identify for the record what we're looking at in terms of seating.
The total seating that we actually have seating on 2 levels, and one thing I'd like to touch on that I didn't reference in terms of the floor plan is that on the second floor, we have access on the food hall side of 2 sets of stairs that actually lead to a balcony area, similar to the brewery. And at the second floor, there's another tenant space which is proposed to be used as an arcade area. And a small area which we label as an office, which is to be used for the facility or shared, for common area use by an event that may take place or some seating that may be moved inside. Anyway, the total number of seats will be provided was the schedule on. Right, they could sit along counters, they could sit along small clusters, and again, make it more of a social environment. So on the first floor, we have a total of 37 stools across the food stalls and through various areas throughout the facility. And then on the, we also have 68 seats of individual tables, or individual chairs adjacent to tables. On the second floor area, we provide a similar kind of situation. We have small tables, small, stool areas, and counters. And again, a variety of different things for people to sit. And there's a total of 7 stools on the second floor, 25 on the second floor, tables and chairs, and a total of 137 seats in the facility. Now, we also talked about the number of seats that we have on the outdoor patio. We propose in there to have 16 seats, and that's going to be comprised of various types of patio furniture. So, for further clarification.
And is there fencing that's proposed?
And in the back, adjacent to the existing distillery area, there's a small fenced area that's proposed in here, and that's part of the, if they do get a distillery in there, they need that to, if they want to have outdoor, any kind of outdoor access to that. We provided a counter here for some stand-up and an overhead door. You need that to enclose it with the ABC liquor laws. So that's a small area so that only patrons can go in and out through here, and they can come in through the back. There's no access to the distillery side from the main facility due to the ocean requirement, or not the ocean, the ABC requirements.
Touch on, if you would, for me, the elevation and building height, just to make sure that we're in compliance with the ordinance. Yes.
So on drawing A3.0, we actually, what we did is we looked at the ordinance and we prepared a small height chart. We took the various points around the whole building in terms of the grade, and then measured to the highest point of the building. And our building is 34'6" from the on average.
So you're using the average grade,
Average grade.
which is consistent with ordinance standards, is that
That's
correct?
correct.
And you mentioned 34 feet 6 inches.
That's correct. Yeah.
Moving on to signage.
That's good.
So, what we actually prepared was, on this is also a various signage calculations based upon the ordinance, and identified square footages and types of signage, et cetera. Our whole goal behind the signage for this building is to make a uniform sign package, which has consistent lettering, consistent colors, is demountable, is, so that way when you get another tenant in there, it can be removed and replaced. Our sign lettering, and drawing A3.1 describes, it shows it is for the various types of signs, which we have different types and different sizes. The goal is to have a simple Times New Roman or a similar font. The channel cut, Lexan type letter, which is raised off the sign 1.5 inches off the backing. To give it something sort of interesting to look and at least a little bit of dimension and depth. And then it's set on a composite back or an AZEC back. So that AZEC backing could be completely removed. And then they could put a whole new piece in place when a bigger tenant comes to change. So without having to, hatch holes in it, just take it off, put a new piece. Done. Signage itself would be illuminated along the front of the building or across the front from here by under canopy lighting. So provided a small detail, which is fixed with light fixtures directly underneath the soffit. Little round canisters that are widespread and you can direct the bulb so we can illuminate the sign directly. Just simple and clean. And that would be across the front. At the main sign, which would be a logo, which would be located right over the main entrance sign, would have a small gooseneck type light fixture, which basically looks like this in here, with a 10-inch fan, would be black in color, and that would just shine to illuminate the sign that would be over the main entrance to identify it. Now there's various types of signs throughout the building, so starting with the numbers of signs, our goal was to balance the number of signs across the front. So for example, I think this sign shows it the best. Instead of having
The document you're referring to
is A 3.0, is to have just try to, balance them in sections so that they're, centered on the main entry A piece. So, again, just to try to make it clean and uniform. On the rear, because we have access to the parking lot in the rear, and people will be coming in, we have another directory sign or another identification sign, which would identify, Stengel Factory. And we also have another sign on this back corner, which is the entry to the distillery.
Let's deal with the front facade. And what we're looking to do is orient the board in terms of the signage to certain business uses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And first, if you can identify the total number of signs, how that corresponds to the business uses, and if there is a different type of sign, for example, an identification sign, separately enumerate that.
So actually what we have proposed, or what if we go back to the floor plan, when we looked at the number of tenants, we're anticipating having 9 tenants. That would include brewery, distillery, the 6 food hall tenants, and the Retrocade arcade, which would be in the 2nd floor.
That totals 9.
That totals 9. And so, plus we would have the logo piece at the top, which would make 10. No, I'm sorry. And One other thing is we planned on in the front, to clarify, we had a brewery, we plan on having another sign in the rear for the distillery, along the front. So there's a total of 10 signs on the front, including the retrocade sign, which is over the main entrance door. And that covers the front of the building.
Let's deal with that, so we take it in steps and in pieces. With regard to the front, can you identify what we understand the ordinance requirement to be and what we are doing with regard to the signage proposed and its compliance, and if alternatively there's any variance relief associated with the application?
So we have we actually have 9 proposed uses. Actually, we're proposing 10 signs. Each individual area, or actually if we look at the building as a whole, we would be entitled to 100 square feet of total sign area, meaning that because there's a division of the building of a firewall, that would give us 50 square feet of signage for this lot on this side and 50 here, so we totaled it up together. That would give us, what we propose here are signs of various sizes. So for example, on the brewery side, these signs are each 10.44 square feet each. There's actually 2 of them here. We actually, to balance the facade, we added 2 more to balance how that looked, as I said before. Our type of sign 1 is, again, 10.44 square feet each. So when we total all that up, we have 108.785 square feet, which would, based upon a 100 square foot allowance, would require 8.785 square foot variance per signage along the front of the building. Now, as we start to go look, we look further into the building and we start to look at the rear. We look at the rear of the building, we actually have 2 more signs. So that would bring us to the total of 12. These 2 signs, one would be for the distillery, this one is 7 square feet. And the other sign that we have here is 15 square feet. It's 1 foot 6 by, if I remember correctly, it's 1 foot 6 by 10 feet. So that would be 15, so we'd end up with a total of 22 square feet of signage on the rear. Separate from that, we have 2 directory signs. These are the signs which have each individual tenant's names in them. Both directory signs are located on the back of the building, mainly because the front we feel that we would have plenty of signage to go along each building, each tenant. But on the back of the building, we really don't have much signage back there except to identify the building. So there would be a directory sign to identify the tenants that were inside of the building. So this tenant, basically that sign is set up right now to be, they're set up to be 2.5 by 3.5 square in terms of size, 2.5 wide by 3.5 high. But your signage ordinance identifies it by square inches. So that would, we propose 1,260 square inches of directory sign here, and another 1,260 square foot of directory sign on the brewery side, which would be here. And so if we looked at it from a variance standpoint, taking the number of tenants that we have, we anticipate, 8 tenants on the food hall side. So 8 tenants times 72 square inches would give us 576 allowable square inches of directory sign. And that would, we would be required, based upon what we're showing, we would need a variance of 684 square inches. Now, just to give you an idea of the directory sign, it's just a little bit larger than this board total. So this board is 2 feet by 3 feet, so to kind of give you an idea that we're not really proposing anything outrageous. It just sounds outrageous when you're looking at it from a square inch standpoint.
Is that mainly just to help deliveries and business access from the back?
It's
And
mainly
to
just
identify like where people would need to go if you're not approaching it from the front as a customer.
Right, and so that's the reason that we have actually a sign over the top that said, identify that as the entrance into the food hall. And then that small directory with sign would sit right next to it. Now, from a similar, just to balance out the whole concept, is, to balance out the idea of directory signs, we have another, same exact sign, just trying to mirror image it. Same square footage, except we really technically only have one tenant. So depending on how we wanna look at it, 1,260 square inches, we only have one tenant, 72 square inches, so that would require a variance of 1,188 square inches. So that would be looking at it. The other, when we further look at the ordinance in different sections, we are allowed signage for the second floor, because we do have second floor tenant. So, you know, their name would be listed on the directory, however, we feel we could use one of these signs as that second floor tenant identifier, you know, as just a, you know, trade-off in terms of square footage.
So let me just understand that properly, just to take a pause here for a minute. The third variance that you're asking for is for the second directory sign, did I understand
Yes,
that
that'd
properly?
be correct,
Okay.
right here.
I just wanna make sure I got that.
Yep.
So, Mr. Cucci, in summary, front, rear, and directory, if we can think about it that way. Front, what's being proposed is number of signs that correspond to business uses. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And then we're looking at total square footage. So number first, and then total square footage, number, individual business uses, and then square footage.
We actually have number of signs that we're proposing along the front. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is retrocade, which is stuck in there.
So 9 business uses, 1 identification
One
sign.
identification sign.
And then with regard to the total area, if you looked at it as 2 buildings, and we're applying for 0 side yard, we have constraints with regard to the brewery in terms of its orientation. That testimony's been presented.
Correct.
50 square feet, the sum of it's 100. And with regard to the total signage corresponding to the individual business uses, it's 108.785.
Correct.
Okay. Then with regard to the rear, again, we're keeping with the same concept in terms of 2 signs corresponding to separate business uses. Correct? And then with regard to total area, 8 square feet by ordinance, what is proposed is 22 square feet.
That's correct.
Okay. And then finally, the directory, you're looking at 2, and if you're looking at total area.
The total area, again, it's daunting in terms of square inches, but the total area that we're providing is 1,280 square inches each, which is, what's that right now?
1,280 or 1,260?
1,260 square feet, square inches each. Right on. So that's what? 2,320 square inches, of which we would need a variance of. That would be 772 square inches of variance needed with 2 directory signs.
Any other testimony with respect to signage?
I think the most important thing to consider on the whole building is that the signage needs to be as simple and clean and concise and uniform as possible. And that'll just lend to the the way that the whole facility works and looks. So that's what our goal here was, and that each individual tenant was to have a sign so they could be identified from Stangle Road, and also at least so that way toward the rear of the building there was a nice identifier for people to know where the entrance was to the rear, and also access to the corner tenant.
Quick question, that their second directory sign, that's next to the stairs that go to the door that goes to the stairs upstairs.
Actually, that's tenant directory sign would be, that's correct, it would actually be right there.
Alright, so that's going to how many tenants upstairs?
There's
on
actually,
that
it's all the
side?
same tenant, the brewery, if we were looking at the brewery side, because that's where this one would be.
Right,
I just turned it upside down. The brewery side, the brewery is also gonna use this second floor area, proposed. Turn this upside down. Consistent. That area is gonna be a small workroom, closet storage, and some additional storage area.
So essentially that second directory is just for brewery.
We have a traffic consultant who would provide testimony, perhaps just for the record. You identify what the parking requirements are with regard to the uses and seating.
Yes.
Perhaps you could just articulate that for the record.
So on drawing A 1.0, we provided a small parking calculation at the bottom, in which we identified the various uses according to the zoning ordinance. So we have use, required number of parking spaces based upon use, the square footage area proposed, and the number of seats where it's applicable. So for example, we have manufacturing, which is 1 per 1,000 square feet. We have a total of 5,448 square feet. So we require 5, that would be 5 spaces. The small office area, that second floor area, that could be used different ways, we still left it as office, and that's 3.5 per thousand. It's 301 square feet, so that requires one space. We have an area what we call restaurant, and that covers all of the seating throughout the food hall side of the facility. So that is 1 per 3 seats, and we would say that we need 137 seats. That brings us to, let me see my other chart. Letters are small. So that brings us to a total of 46 spaces. We have a retail arcade on the second floor of the food hall area. That actually is 1 per 250 square feet. We have 1,627 square feet up there. So that's 7 spaces. And we have a total on our chart of 59 spaces.
So the grand total of required spaces would be 59.
Would be 59, that's right.
Madam Chair, no further questions. If the board professionals have questions to ask Mr. Cucci.
I just have one. The patio area outside the distillery, how is that accessed and by who?
The patio area outside of this is actually only accessed through a door on the side. So there's a small door on the side of the building through the distillery. And that's this fenced in area. So only patrons within the distillery, when it was used, can use that space due to the alcohol.
The distillery is accessible from inside the food court area?
No, it is not.
So the door is exterior?
It's only exterior access only.
And then those patrons that are inside the distillery can access the outdoor patio area through a door within the fenced area?
Correct.
So there's no gate in the fenced area?
At this point, we're not providing a gate in the fenced area. However, there
Is
may
that
be.
allowed, is that allowed by
We
ABC?
may actually by ABC to stick a gate in there.
And the patio is gonna be used for what purpose?
Well, we have actually a counter out here, so people, if they're coming to visit this space, they can actually have stand-up counter that they can stand
And
up
that's
and
what that
have.
roll-up overhead door is?
Excuse me?
The plan calls for an overhead door to counter.
Correct.
So this is a roll-up,
So the
some
whole
sort of
idea is
door.
that whole facade, that whole area opens up, it's a glass door, opens up, and gives them area to stand out and hang out and drink whiskey.
There'll be no seating out there?
No.
Just one item, Mr. Clerk, reminds me, with the patio area, there's seating in that area, correct?
There's seating in the patio area.
Did we identify what the parking requirement might be with regard to that seating?
I'm sorry, the seating in what patio area?
On the side patio area, there's actually a small.
Right, my question went to the fenced-in patio.
Right, right.
There's
And
no
actually
seating
just-
there, right?
Yeah, Don was clarifying.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The other
Okay.
seating that actually is out
You-
on the
you
side.
submitted, you referenced it tonight at the last meeting, you submitted a supplementary exhibit.
That's correct.
Of seating.
Correct, it's the same drawing, it's just a shot down version.
So, but I'm sorry, but there's no seating adjacent to the distillery?
Correct.
Okay.
That's only a
Okay.
stand-up area.
That's what I thought, okay.
And anyway, so we provide in here a total of 16 seats,
How does that impact the parking?
and that would be equal to 6 parking spaces.
So with regard to the number of spaces, 59 plus 6 would be 65.
That's correct.
Mr. Jones, could we swear Mr. Mortera?
Sure. So would you raise your right hand? You swear the testimony you're about to give us, may include the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Madam Chair, with your permission, there was one question with regard to the gate. I guess to keep continuity, because I know there's going to be additional questions from Ms. McManus, just so that we can address that one point. Thank you.
Should be a gate right here. So we want people to be able to flow out of here and go into the area, buy some moonshine, and then go back.
We want that too. If you remember, we just do that on the other building too. The other patio, enclosed area, because of egress. So I would assume that unless it's against ABC that you would want it there.
Yeah. Most of this is regulated by ABC, permitting.
Yeah, but I mean, in the other building, I think we needed it for egress anyway, so I would assume you need it for both egress.
Yeah.
As long as it's permitted by ABC, then we would want it there too.
Yes, we were allowed, on the brewery, we were allowed an egress on the, they wanted us to fence it, that's why the fence is going in here. And we did put in 2, on that one, because it was significantly larger, we did put in 2 gates. There's no way you want people not to be able to get out of it.
In the parking calculation for the 46 seats on the restaurant,
Correct.
is there any calculation that includes employees?
Well, based upon the way that the ordinance is written, that includes
That's including
employees. And I believe our expert will be able to further clarify that.
Okay.
Quick couple questions on,
Yeah, let's let Beth continue and then we'll go to the board members.
I wanna bring us back, to the signage that was discussed as part of your earlier testimony.
Sure.
And, I mean, I can start with the rear of the building, so I think that's a little bit easier. But I wanted to better understand the purpose of the second directory sign. By second, I mean the one on the, northern end of the building that I think you said accesses, just the distillery.
Actually,
Brewery, or the
it's
brewery, I'm sorry,
the
thank you.
brewery. Yes, that's
And
correct.
I hate to, but my concern is that you guys are seeking relief for the permitted area for a directory sign, and I'm a little unclear as to what the purpose of that sign is, and therefore if the relief is necessary.
Well, the purpose of this sign was just to add a small identifier for the brewery. I mean, at the end of the day, that was balancing out what was existing. So,
In reality, we will probably say Lone Eagle Brewery, not for the public. I wanted another sign so people don't, when they come into the food court, aren't trying to get in, get into these doors, which probably will be unlocked. So I wanted to have another sign in here, and so I called it a directory sign.
Then if that's the case, I think the idea of putting the directory sign shown on the plans is actually an invitation for people. And perhaps maybe what you wanna do is revise that from a directory sign that lists your tenants to a smaller sign, more in line with the ordinance, but also one that states Lone Eagle Brewery, not open to the public, or whatever terminology you need to serve that purpose.
Hence my
Or
question.
Lone Eagle Manufacturing.
Manufacturing facility,
Employees
employees only.
Deliveries only.
I didn't know, I wanted to put something
You're still
around.
directed to only one
I appreciate that.
tenant
You don't
on
want
the
them to
side,
walk
so
in
you don't
and out of
need
that
it.
area.
Yeah, you don't really need it.
So I don't have an
Perhaps-
objection to changing that to a, what would you call that sign if it's not a directory?
I would just call it a facade sign
A
on the rear
facade
of the building.
sign, okay.
And maybe your architect, while we're working things out, could give a revised area so that if there is any type of an approval that's granted to the application, we can incorporate that right in.
We can, it'll probably be half the size of the directory sign.
We could make it 6 square feet, call it a day.
6 square feet will be fine.
It's basically the size of this.
And I don't need anything fancy, just to tell people not to go in that door.
Yeah, I think that would be, hold on, 6 square feet, isn't that the
Well,
same
that's
size of the directory sign?
directory sign you
That
put
would be the size of the door.
So make it 3
No,
square.
Yeah, why don't you cut it in half? So roughly
3 square feet.
Yeah, I think that would, the rear of the building is not gonna have too much public, visibility, obviously, but it is important that, that it serves your purpose, but also that it looks nice for the folks that are coming to the building. So that's the rear. I don't have much of a concern with the other facade signs or the director sign of the rear of the building, but on the front of the building, I wanted to talk about this a little bit. You are seeking relief, and there are a number of signs here, and I think I understand your purpose behind the signs is you wanna provide visibility and advertising space to the tenants, specifically the food stall tenants that you have in there. But my concern that I wanted to raise and to try to generate some discussion amongst the board is whether or not this is gonna create a cluttered rather appearance on the front facade of the building. Whether or not the 8 signs along the eave of the building plus the other 2 is gonna create some visual clutter, and whether or not there's an opportunity, whether the board wants to take the opportunity to try to reduce the number of signs to cut that down. So, I wanted to raise that as an issue, but I think that you obviously stated your
Respectfully,
needs, so.
I try to decrease the clutter,
I
and
know
I
we've
try
talked
to,
about
you know, I
this.
have to have tenants and they have to have signage, or else I'm not gonna get tenants. And so we tried our best to reduce the clutter and make it look more consistent. So I think we did a good job
I will say,
addressing the clutter.
I'm very pleased to hear that you're looking at a uniform sign appearance. I think that's gonna be much better than if you had a blue and a red and a green and a rainbow colored sign and so forth. And with the exterior lighting fixtures rather than something that's internally illuminated, I think that will certainly be a benefit to the appearance of the building and to the Stangle generally. But notwithstanding the number of signs and the need for the relief, I did want to throw this as an issue that I think that the board should consider.
But the tenant's gonna require a sign. We can't rent this, the business, they want to put a business sign up.
Actually, my concern was almost the opposite. Not so much that, I understand your point, and I really appreciate the consistency and the cleanliness of it. But when you get too consistent, you almost get bland. So my comment's kind of a combination of the aesthetics as to how the signage interacts with this very eclectic and really thriving part of the borough right now. So I guess my comment would be, I think I would be open to not seeing all Times New Roman, Times New Roman, Times New Roman, but allowing the local, let's say there's a restaurant across town that wants to have a food court in there, or, and they have a certain logo. I don't think it's a bad thing to allow multiple kinds of fonts, as long as the like you say, the consistency of the AZAC back, that's a really great idea. Maybe the same coloring, you only do black and white, or whatever you want that sign package to look like. But I don't necessarily think that, I think it becomes very sterile, and this part of, and as a result, and no offense, the architecture is a bit sterile too, and I work for developers all the time. I'd love to have seen a little bit more kind of interest on the elevation, meaning I think I see a wainscot brick at the way bottom.
Yeah,
It's
it's
about
18
big.
inches high.
Yeah, really tiny. I mean, it's kind of wimpy. You guys added 4 dormers, and that's it. And it's essentially the same. And again, I like the idea of, I'm an architect, so it's like a crit in school. Remember those days. So the consistency of this all being one, development and one package, I like that. I mean, I do like the fact that it's reflecting what's on the existing building, but I also think we could step it up a little bit. Now we've got this existing building that it was built in, a very efficient, not frugal, I don't wanna use that term, but efficient way architecturally, but let's try to step it up a little bit and put a little more flavor into it, so that it's starting to mesh with the, you've got, Stengel Factory right down the way, and we're starting to get some real nice eclectic buildings, and this is kind of gonna be connecting the two of them. And I think that, we missed an opportunity there that I think I'd like to see developed a little more. Still with modern build, I'm not saying go pull out, but some thin brick veneer won't add a whole bunch of money to the cost of the project, but I think it would add some character to it. Yeah, what?
The building stone, I mean, I don't wanna bring brick in, stone, I mean, I could add more stone.
Brick,
but-
I'm saying veneer, whatever.
Oh, yeah, I don't wanna bring brick in, I mean.
You want to see more texture.
Exactly, I wanna see more character to the building, I'm not saying, don't take me literally, not,
Oh, okay, I was
choose
like,
whatever you want.
don't have no brick on the.
No, choose whatever you want, but you need more character.
Would you, object to maybe like a gray building? If we
You mean
could do
different color,
different
yeah, that was the
color.
other thing, I don't think your colors are
You know,
identical to the other, but the color theme, because it's working as one complex, so, I would expect to see at least some of the same colors on both buildings.
Yeah.
But maybe break the siding colors up a bit, or add some, like I said, add some veneer, and I'm not asking for a whole bunch, but I think that your signage being consistent, but still have the individuality of the tenants inside of it, especially because you designed it to be able to be taken down and replaced. That's gonna give you some character to the building, and then adding a little bit more on the materials on the elevation, I think will help you out a lot too.
Well, one suggestion might be is that you have your square footage allocation for signage, and that each individual tenant then comes in with their preference in terms of the size of the sign.
I think they would have to do that anyway, wouldn't they?
So that gives them flexibility, so it's not all.
But you can still keep the same, if you wanna do it all black and white, that's fine, again, you already got the specific sizes that you're wanting. But I think that'll give you a little more character.
Right.
Well, everybody's got their own,
Yeah.
logos and their own
Exactly.
style. And
But the way you presented it was everybody's Times New Roman, or, so take that opportunity and use that as part of your diversity and character.
Are we, some questions, or are you?
I wanted to raise the issue about the number of signs and the appearance, and for you guys to have that discussion, that was it.
Does anybody else have any opinions on our signage guy? Our favorite signage guy is in Barcelona, so.
They got some very good signs for us.
Yeah.
Mr. Jones, on that point, perhaps Mr. Dodson is going to be testifying later. We could swear him in as well.
Or we can push it to later, either way.
Well, it's probably before.
Well, I just wanna make sure, does Mr. Clerico have any other comments? What about anybody else on the board?
Yeah, I have just a question. I think it's on your drawing A1.0, in mind the floor plan. Yes, thanks. Okay, the wall that is the lot line boundary, yes.
Correct.
Did you say that there's a kitchen on the south side of that wall?
You are allowed to penetrate this wall.
That's
a very limited amount.
That's what I was curious about. I thought the reason for that lot line redraw was because you can't have food on the brewery side, but.
Well, we can still maintain this, but I think if we maintain this as a fire rated area, not with access here, I think we'll be okay.
Okay.
So you're saying the fire rated wall is kind of like this?
It's actually gonna go straight that's the lot line, but the fire rated wall is gonna actually go straight through here, but it's gonna
Also do that, yes, that's what I mean.
Oh.
basically a little compartment.
And just curiosity again, more problem. I mean, if you got all the food vendors out there, who uses the kitchen?
Well, the idea was that, it was something that we just had discussed, is the idea that we had a common area, because we don't know exactly at this point how much cooking each individual tenant is gonna do. So if there was an area that we needed for additional cooking, that this could be a shared space that could be used for heavier equipment.
Or storage, or the brewery. Right now, some of the tenants that we've spoken to, and nobody's really committed yet, and nor have I wanted them to commit till I get the building up, so they may not need a common kitchen. I looked at the common kitchen at Stanton Market, it wasn't really that used that much, it was mostly a large refrigerator. So we're not really sure if that area will be a common kitchen. It may be part of the brewery, maybe the distillery may need it, or depends on how much they're gonna actually do in here. They may need to ferment in there. So we're really keeping this open, depending on what our tendencies are.
Just curious, did you guys, I'm assuming you might have taken a look at Easton's Market, do they have a common?
Yes, they had a common
Yeah.
kitchen, but it was a large area that had very, very little in it. I was surprised how small it was. It was mostly used for storage, and it had a large.
For the tenants?
Yeah, for the tenants, and it had a large walk-in cooler. And I'm not sure we're gonna need that yet, but we did have to provide the area in our drawing, just in case.
Anybody else?
I have a question. On the retrocade sign, will that be backlit through the vestibule?
No, actually, the retrocade sign over the front is actually, this is actually just lit from lighting that'll be up underneath the canopy. So there's no other lighting that's gonna come out on top. Actually, there's no bigger.
It's in the barrel, the light will be in the barrel.
So that's kind of a blow up of the entry right here. So the lighting that's in the bay up above will just gently shine over the door and light the sign.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, any more questions from the, board?
Real quick question. As far as the signage goes, it'd be like a national, company wanted to come in, and they had a specific logo that they wanted to use as far as their signage. Is that something that you were still interested in, or?
Yeah, I would be interested in, based on the discussion we just had, yes. I would limit them to the space that I have here, but they could, they have to have, some people have to have their own logo, or else they're not renting from you. So, yes, we would like to be able to put in a logo if that company does require it. And that'll help you out with not all the signs being the same.
Anybody else on the board? Any questions, from the public?
Yes, you testified that your parking requirement is 65 spaces. Where is that parking going to be provided on this lot?
Well, why don't we let our traffic guy address all of that?
Oh, okay.
Okay, can we wait
That'll
for
come
the,
later.
can we wait for the planner for that one, Lois?
Yes,
Because I have the same question.
And then I wanted to know what exactly, you have these signs nicely placed across the front of your building. What is this actual size of each one of those signs?
Each sign may vary in size a little bit, but for the most part, they're.
I'm talking about the 8 that are on the.
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
eight.
They're 1'2".
1'2".
High by 9 feet.
1'2" by 9 feet.
By 9 feet long, and that's 10.44 square feet.
Okay, thank you. How far is 9 feet?
1 foot more than me.
Thank you. I don't see anybody in here that's 9 feet tall.
This table's 6, so 9 would be 3 more feet. That's so for you, this is 6 feet right here. That's this long, but it's only this high.
Yes,
Right.
I'm not concerned about the height, but I am concerned about the length, because if you cut it down just a foot or so, then you would be able to comply.
But that's very limiting for these tenants, and then the signage, the letters that fit inside that band, then start to get like 6 inches if it gets any smaller.
No, I'm not talking about the height, I'm talking about the length.
The length, I know, but that all works proportionately.
Lois, I think he already testified that each sign was approximately 10.4, and they're going for a variance. They've got a total amount allowed of 100 square feet. So they're going for a variance of 8.78 feet, very small. So they're allowed 100 square feet total, they've got 10.4 square feet.
8 feet is all
I need
Yeah.
you to stick to questions.
Got it.
So do you have any questions more for the architect?
No, just about the parking, which will come from.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we call Mr. Buckley.
Would you raise your hand? Testimony about your testimony,
Yes.
It's
Lublandecki. Talk pretty loud, so I don't mean that. You don't need it.
Mr. Buckley, let me first qualify you as an expert. Would you, similar to Mr. Cucci, review your educational background and your
Yes.
employment?
Certainly. A Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from New Jersey Institute of Technology, and a Master of Science degree in Civil Engineering from New Jersey Institute of Technology. The area of concentration there was specialist was traffic, and as a PE since 1975. I'm also licensed in the states of New York and Pennsylvania. I have over 45 years of experience and have done several projects similar to this type of site, in addition to designing traffic signal systems and other types of highway work. I've been qualified as an expert witness in front of this board a couple of years ago, also in front of the township of Raritan and Clinton Township in this county, and then several other townships and municipalities in other counties.
Just very, very briefly, you've done work at McGuire Air Force Base, Greenwich Township, their circulation plan. You've done work in Pennsylvania, Sands Casino.
Sands Casino, yes.
So from that standpoint, you've done both residential and commercial
Absolutely,
work,
yeah.
not only in New Jersey, but in other states.
In other states also.
Madam Chair? Could you identify for the board what you reviewed in preparation for your testimony here this evening?
Certainly, yes. I reviewed the site plan and also the architectural plan, in addition to the parking requirements for this project, and I prepared a parking occupancy. I conducted a parking occupancy study and prepared a report outlining my findings.
You were also in attendance at the first hearing, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you've heard the testimony of all the witnesses who have
Yes,
been
I did.
presented, including Mr. Rubner, is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Have you also had occasion to speak to Mr. Rasciola with regard to this?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I spoke to Mr. Osceola last week concerning the comments in his latest review letter.
So from that standpoint, you're prepared to address those comments?
I am prepared to address those comments and in our conversations relative to those comments.
Very good. Can you review for the board what ordinance requirements apply to this application and then what is proposed by the applicant?
Yes, 59. Well, this particular application, 59 spaces initially were required, and since then there was a 16 more seats were added in the patio area to the site, which would for three seats equaling one space would require an additional six spaces, for a total of 65 spaces being required for this application. 35 spaces are provided on site, which leaves 30 off-site spaces required. In addition, there are 18 spaces
existing in front of the site. So the variance would be 30 minus 18 would be a 12-space variance. Now, is what we're asking for. Now, my study, the study that I conducted, that demonstrates that there is ample off-street parking to accommodate this variance, and in all honesty, a lot more parking. And I can go through.
If you would, you presented a parking study. If you could provide an overview with regard to what that was based upon. Were counts done to verify demand, and when those counts were done, were they done at certain periods of time that would reflect significant use or not significant use?
Certainly, yes. Well, first of all, the parking study, it's called a parking occupancy study, and what we do is we count the number of spaces that are occupied during a given period of time, and we do it in 15-minute increments. So every 15 minutes, we take a survey of what spaces are occupied, and we do that over certain periods of time. What we did was we conducted this study, and also Mr. Rufendering conducted also some parts of the study during lunchtime periods and dinner time periods during Friday and Saturday. And we found that the Friday night and clearly Saturday periods were the critical times where there was the most parking demand. In addition to that, I have to mention that I conducted the study on Friday evening. It was from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and it happened to be June 22nd of 2018. And the Center for Educational Advancement was having some type of an event there, and it was probably one of the busiest nights of the year from a parking demand point of view. So sometimes, due to the schedule of this project, you get to a point where you can actually survey very close to a worst-case scenario. And I clearly feel that I was able to survey that worst-case scenario that evening, and I based my study on the worst case. By worst case, I mean the most parking demand, existing parking demand today in that area.
And with regard to the selection of times during the day, was there any consultation with Mr. Rosciola in terms of selecting lunch and dinner? Was there any discussion with him in terms of what he might want to see by way of data and when it would coincide during the day?
Yes, there was. What we did was I indicated to him, before I did the study, had a conversation, indicated to him that we would be using data from that lunchtime period and from the Friday and Saturday evenings, and he agreed that that would be the critical times, clearly, to be conducting the survey.
Now, you submitted the parking study. Could you provide an overview for the board in terms of what was determined?
Certainly. And I've got I can go to I don't have a laser printer, so I'm going to use the scale, point to different areas. Debbie, you want a laser? What we did is the area in front of the existing Loneyville Brewery and the proposed site on Stengel Road was divided into several different areas along Stengel Road. And our study that we conducted basically just was on Stengel Road. We didn't even go out to Liberty Village or anything like that. We just used the parking spaces that were right in the very near proximity of the site. And just to go through it, Area B is in front of the Lone Eagle Brewery. Area A is just south of it. And Area C
Mr. Rodecki, I apologize, if I interrupt for just a second. Because we were recording this, we're referring to a document marked as Exhibit 11, and it's a survey area, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was a part of your traffic study, is that correct?
That is correct. It's, and the title is Parking Occupancy Survey Areas.
Wait a minute, I thought we already had exhibit 11 identified earlier.
11 proceeding plan.
Right, this would be exhibit 12. Sorry.
No, thank you.
So, site aerial is exhibit 12.
Now, the reason and to go through these, I'm not going to go through every individual area. I just wanted to point out that the Area C that we show here is in front of the proposed site, and that consists of 18 spaces that I was talking about when we talked about the variance. We actually broke this study up in actually two areas. As you can see on this plan, areas A through G. It was really the first area that we studied to see how many spaces in that area were available for future parking. But then in addition to that, especially on that one Friday night, we added areas H and I to that, because we felt that these areas still were, it was very reasonable for people parking in these areas to patronize the new site. And the distances were 300 or 400 feet away, still not that long for people to walk to the site. So what we did was we used the entire areas A through G, and those particular areas had 118 total spaces that are available. And this is the off-street park, this is the parking on Stengel Road, including the area A that is south of the Lone Eagle Brewery. And as I stated before, we took our survey on that June 22nd, pretty much the absolute worst case scenario, and we found on that June 22nd that there was still within the initial areas A through G, those initial areas, we still found that on that evening, at the worst possible time in terms of this study, there were still 29 spaces available for people to park. If you add the spaces H and I on that evening, and most of those spaces were unoccupied, we had another 26 spaces that were available for a total of 55 extra spaces available on that evening. And again, I feel that we got pretty much one of the busiest evenings of the year. As I stated before, 30 off-street parking spaces would be needed, and those are the spaces that would be needed off-site. We've got 55 available, so even on in the worst case, we have an excess of 25 spaces that would still be available for parking. And that's not even counting if people want to go and park in Liberty Village and come around, which I did see some people doing that, but I wanted to make this study very conservative, so I did not include any of the spaces that were open in Liberty Village. And based on those numbers, I feel that there's clearly enough parking for this site and then some.
What time of day did you study? Not just in the evening, but in the day, have you done the study?
What we did was we conducted studies during lunchtime, also on days in the 11:30 to 1:30, and we found that it wasn't quite as busy as it was on the evenings. Clearly, our critical time was Friday and Saturday evenings, and like I said, the one that we found, which was probably one of the busiest times of the year, was that Friday evening, June 22nd.
I go there 2 or 3 times a week in that area, and it's always in the late morning, 11, 12 o'clock.
Yes.
And there's all of those that are occupied on that side, they all have traffic there. I mean, they're all parked.
Yeah, I could give you my report does though address that. What we did was, my report addressed several times when we took the study, and again, I just, at this point, I just presented the worst case scenario. But during the lunchtime hours, there was clearly more spaces available than that critical Friday evening, yes.
Because most of the time when I'm leaving there, it's somewhere around 1 o'clock, and it's usually pretty well parked.
Again, our area that we studied though, again, we studied this area A and in front, but we studied all the way up to, we studied all the way, we studied up to HI, not beyond that. Beyond that, there's some uses that you may fill spaces.
Bluefish is one. Yeah, the Bluefish is lunch is crowded.
Yeah, so you'll see there, but that's not part of our study here. That's not part of the.
I'm talking about up there just before the brewery, where the chiropractor is, acupuncture, dance studio.
Yeah, there's a gym there.
Yes.
Yeah.
In that area, it's just a little further down, it's usually
Yeah, I can say, right, that area here would be.
You didn't go that far down.
I didn't go that far down, and the closest areas that I did survey during that time would be called areas H and I on this map. And they were shown to be pretty, basically, there was a few spaces there that were taken, but most of those spaces were unoccupied during that time. And again, we're not counting the spaces further north at this point. And also, there's still a lot of it, there was always a lot of it, we didn't count the spaces, but we just observed there's a lot of spaces that were empty in Liberty Village, in that parking lot.
Would you mind taking us through, you've seen Mr. Rapiola's two letters?
Sure.
There's the, comments 1 through 7. Basically, his updated letter of the 22nd states that, item number 2 was already addressed in your parking study. But could you, since he's not here to walk us through, we usually have our
Walk you
consultants
through all-
walk through, would you mind walking us through everything but item number 2?
Sure.
Quickly, you addressed some of these things already, so you can just kind of say, this is what I
Sure,
said.
yeah. Well, first of all, item number 1, the plans illustrate 4 parking spaces abutting the existing brewery. Should be clarified, and that's been corrected already. I think we've heard testimony last week that 5 spaces were included, and now we're using only 4 there in our parking lot. So that was his first comment. Item number 2 dealt with his parking study, which he said he was satisfied.
You don't have to address that one, he was satisfied.
Item number 3. He states that he recommends that the new parking spaces next to the existing brewery be designated for employees, since they're in the driveway and loading zone area. And,
We had the owner of the brewery testify.
right, last week I heard a lot of testimony about that, and the fact that, they can basically, if there's any kind of deliveries, most of the deliveries are gonna be in off hours. You won't have patrons there at the same time you're having deliveries. The one thing though, if you happen to have one when the brewery is open, you're kind of the owners are in control of this. You've got customers that are there, you've got somebody that the truck is making a delivery, and certainly the owners don't want to have upset customers. So if there's a situation where somebody wants to back out of that space, they'll make the delivery truck move. I think it's not like we're dealing with not knowing where these people are. You're dealing with people that are right in these establishments, and we'll be able to make the truck move, and the people will be able to come out. So I don't see that as any problem. I discussed this exact same thing with Mr. Rossiola, and he agreed. And that was like when I had the conversation last week. Number 4.
Excuse me, Will.
Yes.
He agreed that his recommendation for designated employees parking only he's not requiring that?
He's not requiring it, yes. He agreed.
It's not only that, Bob, you don't wanna give your employees the best parking spots. Liveries should be for customers. And having people parking there does not impact his ability to get in and out of the brewery. There's a garage door there that has no parking spots in front of it. So,
Are you gonna designate any area for employee parking?
no.
Yeah, Liberty Village.
Yeah. I had a mall one time, and people, they called me up and they complained, there's people always parking in the front, so I went to go look. It was all the employees parking in the front, all the customers have to park around the back. So, I don't wanna put the employees in the best parking spots in the facility.
Okay. Item number 4. Mr. Rossiola, I can read it. The plans provide for accessible access in the rear and front of the building. Recognizing that the area serves several retail sites, he suggested that the board consider requiring that the plans be modified to convert one on-street parking space to an accessible space. And this can be done by narrowing the proposed bulb out at the southern driveway so as not to reduce the number of curbside spaces. Again, we discussed that, and I indicated to him that during my surveys, there's an accessible space right in front of the Lone Eagle Brewery, and I indicated that during the surveys, we saw that space occupied probably only about half of the time. In addition, there's another accessible space in this area, in Area E. And during any of my studies, I've never seen that space yet occupied. So I questioned the need to have that accessible space and have another space right in front of everything, not occupied. This way, if it's a regular space, at least we'll make good use of it. And he agreed with that, and agreed that we don't need that additional.
Do you have a copy of the actual site plan?
I'm sorry, yeah, I should have brought that up.
On the other side.
Well, we have the space in the back of the building. We think we can save it.
You have another accessible space?
Yes, we meet the handicap requirements
Right.
of the building, through the rear.
In the rear. We'd rather have people, you know, it's just safer than
No.
Opposite of this one?
going out on the Stanley Road.
Turn it over. Flip it around.
Go ahead and run through 5, 6, and 7, and then, I'll turn it over to the consultant.
Yeah, on that plan, what, you have the Lone Eagle for the existing building.
Which is here.
Right here. So which spaces are accessible now, and which spaces are gonna be handicap accessible with the new building?
Okay, the spaces that are accessible now, there's a space right now today, it's indicated as being now changed to the north side of the spaces in front of the Lone Eagle. But today there's a space that's about in the middle.
Okay.
Of the existing set of spaces.
Right.
There's a space I indicated on my Area E, up at, up on Stego Road. Here we go.
See, there's the, right here is the handicap space. Right
There's
there.
a space there.
Okay.
You're referring to a document, is there something more to the back?
Yeah, the back.
A2. Right in the back of the.
A2.
So.
There, and then I'll show on the proposed. On the proposed, site, in this corner of the parking lot, there are 2 proposed accessible spaces.
Okay, now the accessible spaces in the back here, what is the closest entrance for those 2 spaces?
Right here.
Right there, okay.
Yeah, so they can.
And that gets them full access to the interior.
Correct.
Okay.
And there's in the facility,
Okay.
but you can't get to the front.
So there you have 1, 2, 3, and then the one up in our Area E is a little bit more.
Let's go to 5, 6, and 7.
In addition to that, I think the site plan that you reviewed has some do not enter signs here. Instead, to be in compliance, we're going to have one-way signs that can be seen from both directions on the Stangle. We'll also have one-way signs internally, in a one-way sign internally here in the parking lot area. And again, to the satisfaction of your engineer.
Should be ordinance then too, so they have the, not just signs.
Right, and I think there was testimony about that they would be,
Title 39.
Title 39, absolutely. And I already covered number 6, one-way, sign should be installed in the northerly driveway. Number 7, the proposed loading zone infringes into the 2-way driveway. The applicant should detail loading and unloading operations so that the board is confident that 2-way traffic in the driveway will not be disrupted. Since there be such a little 2-way traffic, the same thing goes for, again, the operators of the building are right there. If there's some loading and they block someone, you just move the vehicle. It's that type. We don't anticipate, there'll always be, in most cases, there'll always be at least one lane that will be open, that people can access the residences in the back. And again, we're not talking about that much traffic, we're not talking about a through street. So, I don't see that as any problem. Mr. Osceola agreed that he does not see that as any problem.
Does any board members have any other questions for this witness?
Yeah, I had another question on the study area map that you had.
Sure.
When you did the counts at night, the evening counts,
Yes.
Did you make note if the businesses that across the street had open hours that day?
Yeah, there was that one business, the mail room, I guess it's called MALE room. Might have had a customer or two, at that time, a very, very little traffic that was, parked there, from some of the other businesses. I could notice, I didn't take, official count of it, but I could notice that most of the people were walking to the Lone Eagle. And there were some people that were actually parked in Liberty Village, coming around, that corner there, the sidewalk, and then crossing over to Lone Eagle.
So at the peak evening times for Lone Eagle and the new building, did you see that parking interfering with any businesses across the street?
I didn't see that at all, no. And again, it counted from 6 to 9, and somewhere around 7:30, 8 o'clock, we got the peak, the most spaces occupied, somewhere within that range. And again, we felt we got one of the busiest nights of the year.
It was the anniversary on the one that he tested, he went out.
Oh, that's great, yeah, they definitely got a good
Yes, we do get a
good sample.
Yeah, we got that way, that's why, sometimes you know.
Now, a quick question, none of these parking spaces that are, identified, with the exception of the ADA parking spots, are identified as exclusive to these buildings. In other words, if a customer from the haircutting place across the street parks in your spot, they're not going to get towed away, are
We
they?
don't agree with being exclusive
Thank
parking
you.
spots.
That's all I needed to know.
Or putting signs up.
Or putting
Thank you.
signs up.
Does anybody else on the board have any other questions?
Just a general question. I noticed you said you did it by walking around during a very busy time. Mr. Osceola did not specifically comment on that approach, but he said you use generally accepted standards, and his opinion the parking variance can be granted. So I take it that is an improved technique in
Absolutely,
your
yeah.
business, is you just take a very busy time, walk around, count them up.
Very, very simple, and usually you select the time, select an increment in time, in this case 15 minutes.
Okay.
Seems to be pretty good. And again, you just count the number of occupied spaces every 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Beth, Bob, you guys have any questions?
No, really.
Any questions from the public for this witness? No.
Lois Stewart, 26 Spring Street, the 35 parking spaces that you have testified that will be on site, are they all behind the building?
Well, there's some, there's some, they're behind, and then there's spaces here that are over to the side.
So they're either on the south side or the back?
Either on the south side or the back, correct.
Okay, and they're 35?
Yes, that's 35 on site, yes.
Okay, and are you going to have a landscape person testify?
No, the engineer testified.
Oh, well, I'm wondering about the trees, because we have an ordinance that says for so many parking spaces, you have to have so many trees.
The planner is going to testify with regard to
Yeah,
the
that's
site
not
and
for
its
this witness.
configuration
Okay,
and the
thank
landscape
you, I'll
requirements.
wait until then, thank you very much.
Any other questions from the public for this witness?
Thank you. Just one last item, just so it's in the record, with regard to the borough parking ordinance, and we talked about the 18 inline spaces on Stengel Road. Stengel Road is a little interesting, particularly given the Lone Eagle Brewery and the fact that the property line extended into the inline spaces. That circumstance doesn't apply here, but there is a borough ordinance, 2629H, shared parking. And was that a part of your analysis here with regard to those 18 inline spaces?
Well, the shared parking, again, it's very conservative. There's some type of shared parking. There were several things when we did the study that we tried to make it conservative. One was that, the other was not even counting Liberty Village spaces. So we would be very comfortable with the fact that there's plenty of parking to accommodate demand.
Thank you.
I just got one, I'm assuming, Mr. Thompson was here, and he left. He was in here before, but he left. Was it all worked out that you were gonna mark the lane, private lane?
Yes.
From the twins,
Yes,
is that what was
we've
worked
met with
out?
him several times personally. We try to alleviate all his concerns. One of the things is building that fence between the properties.
At what height
16.
And did Mr. Thompson confirm that was
Yes,
satisfactory?
but we looked at 8 feet and it was a little bit.
So there's no 8 feet.
The chairman was right, you know.
That'll make Todd very happy.
Yeah, he agreed to 6 feet. We spent a little time with him, smoothing things over.
So 6 feet fence in a private lane, no parking.
Correct. Yeah, private property or private lane.
But on the record, right?
Yes.
I do have one quick comment about the parking. As any of you were there on Saturday, this area, Stengel Drive was closed, completely closed. And they accommodated between 2,500, maybe plus people on Stengel Drive through some of the other parking lots that are there. This area can support a lot of parking and a large event, as demonstrated by the festival that we had.
Thank you, though. I unfortunately didn't get there, because I was out of town, but I heard it was great.
It was a great event.
And Todd's wife will appreciate that note too. Now, we usually take a break at 9, so do we want to hear the testimony from the planner, or do you wanna take a break now? I'm gonna leave that up to you guys.
Take 5?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, if you wanna be if you want to be consistent, or it's up to you. Yeah, I think we take 5.
Yes. Thank you.
They can meet the.
I don't know what we would lose because we're gonna end up losing the sidewalk or something. And for .06, it's like, what's the benefit that we're getting? They've got enough, but if they lose a parking space, it might meet the impervious cover, but it's gonna create bigger parking issues. Yes. But at some point, we're gonna, I mean, I have some parking, I take a very long-term view, like, if Stengel does really well, we're gonna have a parking problem there in 5 years, right? Because everybody, all those stores are gonna be filled up with uses that are just jumping, like the Fastenal, some of these places that don't do a lot of business, they're gonna be occupied by really, active retail, restaurants, specialty, stuff like that. Well, alright, so let's talk about, so I don't disagree with the general concern about meeting impervious cover as like a general thing. The thing that speaks to me on this application, you can do whatever you like with it, but even though they are .06 over, they're 15% under on this lot. On lot A, or lot 20. That's the, yeah, that's the southern lot, I believe. So they're, no, I think it's the other way around. I think actually they are quite, there's 65% on the northern side and 0.86 or 86% on the southern side. They're, oh, sorry. I combined, I think they're under the maximum impervious of 80. Yeah, for the two, yeah. I'm not gonna worry. Well, yeah, and actually, maybe I'll grab Jeff just to, if he doesn't like it.
I would like to, I know we're never gonna do less than but I would like to test
Well, let's talk about what they are doing to the trees, which I think is gonna help. So they're required to do 9 shade trees, but they're doing 11, so they've got 2 more extra. They don't, those are, the street trees are just all along the front. So, on their parking lot trees, they are required to do, 12 trees, and the plans have been revised to 11 trees. So they're being, yep. Yes, yes, they're being bagged, and then those, we asked for some sort of tree protection. I just didn't.
I just want to make sure that we get every tree that is required.
Gotta go to Pittsburgh, gotta go to, you gotta see the state. He's already been to Chicago, so I heard that. You got cousins up there. You're really good. I went over there. Excellent job.
Let me confirm this is covered. Yep. No, I know. Yeah, it's like a real environmental benefit. Yeah. I'm with you. Otherwise, we could just plant a bunch of fake trees, but let's not do that.
Some people really get annoyed with me because no tree cutting. I said, no. Their environmental well-being. So I just want as much
Yeah, let me confirm that first just to make sure, because I want to make sure they hit that testimony sooner, you know. Hey, Jeff. Jeff.
They get so annoyed when I ask them questions. If I can find out ahead of time, then they don't.
Okay, are we recording here? Good? All right.
Never stop here.
Right, but I want to know whether our official recording is going. Got it. Okay, let's go.
I remembered about 6 months ago, as a new trial in a jury case. So you never want to be fumbling with paperwork in front of a jury. And here you have the ordinance standards and the multiple witnesses, and I do my direct beforehand, as these folks will attest to. And invariably, when you're looking for something, it's right there, but for whatever reason, you don't see it.
Are we gonna?
Madam Chair, if I could call Mr. Dodson.
Yeah, let's go, make your, let's go.
Josh, can you raise your right hand? You swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, something like that?
I do.
I'm not gonna ask Ann how to spell your last name.
D-O-S-H-N-A. Mr. Dodson, may we qualify you as an expert?
Sure. I have a bachelor's in economics from Johns Hopkins and a master's and PhD in planning from Rutgers. I currently assistant professor and interim department chair of the Department of Planning and Community Development at Temple University, where I've been teaching at least part-time since 2004, full-time since 2012. And as of last year, I am a licensed planner at AICP. And I know most of all of you, so.
With that statement of professional history and licensure, Madam Chair, that we have Mr. Dodson qualify. Mr. Dodson, you reviewed various materials in preparation for your testimony.
Yes,
Could you outline those, please?
I reviewed the original and amended site plans, all of the iterations of the architectural drawings, the report from the applicant's traffic expert, all the letters of review from the board's professionals, engineer, traffic, and planning, looked at the relevant sections of the borough's land development ordinances, and attended the meeting on the 24th of July, and listened to all the testimony that was given.
Very good. We're looking at various with regard to this project, and we've had various testimony with regard to ordinance standards and configurations, and we're gonna have you pull that together.
Sure. So, the 22 July review letter from Ms. McManus notes that the variance relief sought here is for C variances. There's no D variance relief sought here. Most of it is design standard. I'm going to try not to repeat testimony that was given already on the 24th of earlier this evening to try to make things a little efficient, but I'm going to pull some of it together. As you know, this is a existing building use with Flemington Brewery, which will be merged with existing lot 21, which we now call new lot A. On lot A and the existing lot 20, we're constructing a mixed-use two-story improvement with a common wall and a zero side yard setback. And as we testified to at the previous hearing, that's a requirement of the brewery use to segregate the brewery operations from the restaurant and other operations. Mr. Janos asked for a list of all the variance relief. I pulled something together, and Mr. Shaw has something as well, so we can give that to you, so we all have it in one spot. We have it right now. So let me kind of take the variance relief in kind of group together. The first set of variance relief that is needed is for the bulk standards, and it's already been testified that both lots, as they exist, 20 and 21, as well as the proposed lot A, all of them are undersized for the zone, which is a minimum requirement of 65,000 square feet, and both of these are undersized. Those are existing conditions, and we are constrained by those, and we can't do anything about that. We do need relief from that aspect of the ordinance. The dimensions of the building proposed fit other buildings within the zone in terms of height, and size, and scale. The applicant made an effort to propose a building that looked like it fit and belonged in the neighborhood in the district, which then unfortunately, because of the constraints of the lot size, means that we're going to have a few setback variance relief that we need. There is a significant hardship as to comply with all of the setbacks, lot depth requirements under the DAS zoning ordinance by the nature of the size of the lots and use that is here. So, as I mentioned before, because of the brewery use, that needs to be on a separate lot, contained wholly to itself from state regulations, ABC on that, being separate from the restaurant use. The other bulk standard relief is on impervious surface coverage. Testimony has already been given by the engineer, Mr. Green, about the particulars. But technically speaking, because these are two lots, one lot meets the impervious surface requirement of 0.8 in the standard. The second lot, that's lot 20, which is at 0.68, so it's well below. The new proposed lot A, which is a little bit above that standard, at 0.86, I believe, or
Correct.
86. However, if you were to take this together as a single complex, and Mr. Green provided testimony, if you put all of this together, it is still below the 0.8 standard. And just because this is a separate lot, we do need variance relief technically from that bulk standard, but if you look at the entirety of the project, it is well within what the goal and intent of the borough ordinance is. I think that's the bulk relief items. The second area has to do with parking, and we already had testimony about the configuration of the parking lot, circulation on Reasoner, as well as the parking that's being provided on site, 35 spots. Our calculations is that 65 spots would be required according to ordinance. There's a question about employees. Borough's ordinance in this zone just make no mention about employee spots or non-employee spots. It's the intention of the ordinance to provide for all of the parking needs, both employees and patrons, unless it specifically says employee spots. And so since the ordinance is silent in that area, we argue that whatever necessitated by employees is in this zone is covered by the calculations of 65 spots. I also want to mention in the ordinance 2629 Part G, of the borough's ordinance, which, I'm just gonna read it. When in the judgment of the local approving authority, on-street parking is available, then only that proportion of the parking requirement which is not available on the street shall be provided in off-street parking facilities. There are 18 already striped spots along the frontage of the proposed building on Stangl. They exist entirely within the public right-of-way, none of them are on property, but they are along the frontage of this property. So we would argue that those 18 should be counted towards our parking requirement, and the letters from Mr. Asciola suggests that he has no problems granting relief, but the borough's ordinance does account for this kind of situation here. And you heard the testimony of our traffic expert that there is an excess of capacity in and around the area. I also want to just, in terms of the parking, because I know this is something people are worried about, the 2015 reexamination report that this board approved specifically talks about how a development in this zone, in the village, the VAS zone, again, I'm going to read it, designed to complement the walkability of the district and should be integrated in terms of circulation. We know from use that folks will park at one end of Stangl and walk and patronize a number of businesses. While there is certainly adequate parking, as been testified to, we also like the idea that folks will park maybe a little up, patronize a couple of businesses along their lanes, improving walkability. And as we saw this past weekend, 3,000 people managed to find a place to get there. A lot of them walked from town, which is also a good thing. So I don't see any substantial impact on the public good in granting relief from the parking requirements here. But we do need this board to determine that those 18 spaces should be counted, because that is part of the ordinance, and that would be variance.
So the variance would be 12 then?
In my opinion, it would be variance for 12 spots, because there are 65 required, 35 provided on site, 18 along the frontage on Stangl, and then the balance would be 12. That's my testimony. Third variance would be that we've got is dealing with the loading dock space, but I think there's already been testimony by Mr. Durain as well as the operators of the brewery and the owners of the property, and I don't think there needs to be any further testimony along that. And then the other variance relief is on the signage, and I know that we wanted to talk a little bit about the signage. And I just want to argue a little bit about why relief should be granted. I think in my opinion, one of the best aspects of this project is that the idea of having multiple tenants within this food court space. It is very difficult for businesses to get up off the ground with a bricks and mortar establishment. It's why we see so many food trucks. The expense and the regulatory expense of opening up a restaurant is fairly high. And so if a business, a locally owned business, wants to get their foot in the door of opening, starting a restaurant or some sort of food operation, this is a wonderful opportunity for them to do so. They would be able to start out their business, maybe take some recipes, try them out. Or if it's an existing business someplace else, trying to enter the Flemington market to see if that works. This all promotes small business development. This all promotes entrepreneurship. And critical to that is going to be the signage. That each business tenant is going to have its own lease, and each business tenant needs to have its own sign to recognize that it's identity, to recognize that this is where you go to get that business, the product that they're selling. So I think that really goes hand in glove with kind of promoting small business ownership and kind of creating this kind of destination. Again, part of the goal of the VAS zone is to provide a destination, and folks can come to the brewery, come to the restaurants, use the arcade space. These are all the uses that were anticipated in the borough's ordinance there. In terms of the aesthetics, the individual signs, while they may seem, there's a lot of them, I would argue that they fit well into the side of the building, they fit well into the design of the facade. The ability to swap out tenants will mean that without really any interruption, it'll still look nice. If there are businesses across Stangl Road that have a mishmash of ugly looking signs, and I think that this would certainly enhance the zone district by having a cohesive package. And if a national chain wanted to come in with, you know, their green lettering or whatever it is, or their logo, there's no reason why that couldn't be accommodated, on the signs that are here. It allows each of those businesses to have its own identity, and perhaps as their business grows, maybe they need a bigger space, they move to another place in town on a store or something like that. So there's a good way to foster, entrepreneurship here as well. So, those are the variance issues, as I understand them.
And then acceptance.
Right, and then there's design standards, which are a different threshold, and they don't require the same level of testimony, but I do want to go through those. First of all, we're planting more trees than are required. The street trees for the parking lot. There's more trees that are being planted than required. We're preserving as much as possible the trees that are providing landscape buffer between the residential area and Copper Mine Village and Reasoner and the property. We do have testimony last week that we will make sure that they're healthy and pretty much replaced trees will be replaced. But we do need relief from the design standard for the parking island. The ordinance requires that for every 10 spaces there be an island in the parking lot. It's just not possible, given the fact that we want to provide on-site parking, to be able to do that. But I think in the total, the landscaping, we do have more trees overall than we need. The other requirement that's a design standard, not ordinance, is a berm, is a buffer between the residential use. But again, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to build a berm and a fence and landscaping on this tight lot here. And so we're trying to keep as much of the mature vegetation that already exists as possible. So we need relief from that design standard for the berm along there.
And noting that we're going to be installing a fence.
And we are going to be installing a fence. That testimony was given at the last meeting. And that relates to the design standard for trees as a buffer around the parking area. As noted in Mr. Dennis's report, there's two very small sections where we can't plant the evergreen trees that the design standard would require in the north, west, and southeast section of the lot, and that just has to do with the configuration of the buildings and the lots. But again, we're trying to plant trees in other places to make up for that. But we do need relief from that. And then the other design element that needs relief is the lighting. And I think that the engineer provided more than adequate testimony on the lighting. And I will say that the only place where there's a substantial deviation from the borough standard is on the frontage of Stanko. And having a little bit extra lighting there, I don't think has a negative impact in the neighborhood along that business district. And as testified to last week, there will be a timer. So there will be, so it won't be on all night. And I think that covers the variances and the design standards.
Yeah, the only item that was an exception that was noted was the bicycle parking, but the applicant's adding that.
Right, that's already been testified that we're adding bicycle parking to meet that.
So that will be provided.
Okay, do you want to, did you go, you have to forgive me because I'm looking at your July 22nd letter. Did you go through this yesterday, or do you want, last week, or 2 weeks ago?
I don't think
do you want to go through it now, or?
I don't think I've gone through the entire thing as part of one contiguous bit of testimony, but I don't think there's any item in here that hasn't been addressed.
Okay, you want to take a minute, look it over?
You want to let me just
address
if the board will just give me one moment.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions for Mr. Dashner, but there may be. I believe the applicant, we've worked out all planting design issues that have been raised in regards to the buffer. The only exception to that section may be item 6.7 for equipment screening, as to whether the applicant has identified all ground-based utility equipment, noting that if it's not yet been identified where they'll be located, it will be required to be screened with architectural elements or landscape plantings.
Well, the architect provided testimony that vent vent stacks, as might be required, there's a chimney.
The chimney on the exterior
would hide those things. If you're talking about exterior,
there's any, for example, I can't imagine this type of building, but typical would be a ground air conditioning unit, for example, whether those will be placed on the ground or perhaps they'll be in the on the roof or in the attic of the building.
Could be on the ground.
On the ground?
Yeah, on the basement.
Okay.
Adjust the building around.
Will you comply with the ordinance requirement that they be screened with architectural screening or landscape treatment?
We will meet with the Shade Tree Commission and come up with an acceptable screening requirement with them.
Okay, keep in mind that it need not be landscaping, depending on, the area.
Okay.
And how it's configured. It may be, screened with, for example, a small fence that could provide the visual block that the ordinance intends.
Yeah, and it may have to, because some of it entails a glycol chiller,
Mhm.
and we really don't know. Bob, really, you haven't ordered it yet, and, you know, some of it will have to be.
Similar in size to what we have in place today, and we've had that screened in with our dumpster area.
Yeah, I was gonna say, a lot of times equipment screening, it almost calls more attention to it. If you have a big planted screen around it, you can do something that's much more efficient in space and frankly less noticeable if it's done with an architectural element like a fence or using the a dumpster screen that is necessary anyways to serve that purpose. That's the only item in my report that had not been previously addressed through testimony by the applicant or through comments I previously made.
Okay. And Bob, do you have any comments or questions for?
I would just like to clarify the magnitude of the parking variance. This is a little bit of a debate at the last meeting. You've heard, I think, Mr. Rubenecki testified that the variance is 30 spaces. It's clear that 65 spaces under ordinance are required. It's clear that 35 of those spaces are on site. And the deficiency of the extent of relief is a function of whether you're looking at the 30 unavailable spaces and whether you're counting the ones in front of the building as meeting the ordinance.
Right, and so if, I'll say it this way, if the board, under its authority under the ordinance, gives us credit for the 18, then the relief is for 12. If the board determines not to do that, it's a testimony that there exists 30.
Correct.
There exists more than that, there's close to 60 spaces, according to our traffic experts. But I think that
personally, I think the problem with counting the ones in front is that your parking assessment here indicates at various times a few or many of those spaces were being occupied because they're public spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I think the better approach would be to say the relief is for the 30 and take the study and the testimony as that there's more than enough available public spaces to meet that demand. I think that's the better approach, because by just isolating the ones in front, in my opinion, is somewhat meaningless, because you could take the ones across the street.
Because it's still shared.
well, no, it's not, no, because the ordinance specifically talks about the frontage along the property being able to be counted. And then we reduce our requirement.
That's the wording in there, the frontage along?
It is, it's
Yes.
section 2629G. It does specifically state that it has this awkward provision at the end where it talks about the length of spaces shall be 23 feet, where presumably it's not demarcated.
Well, and if we're talking about a residential neighborhood, that's the appropriate standard,
Yeah.
but because the borough has already, if there was no striping on Stangle, then I would agree that we would be bound by that 23-foot linear.
I agree, it doesn't apply to your application, I
Right.
just want to state it for the record, it does have this provision that assumes parallel rather than 90-degree spaces.
I just think it's more appropriate to count them in common, and you have more than adequate documentation and testimony that they're available.
You can really slice it both ways, is what you're saying.
I personally think, just for the sake of this application, and maybe say applications going forward, that you look at, you don't deduct out the ones specifically in front of the property.
And I think the difference in this application is that it's an undeveloped site in front of those 18 spaces, so it's almost assumed that those 18 spaces are kind of credited to that undeveloped site, so I see your point as well.
The other thing I would say,
So we
just
need
in
to
terms of
decide
that-
whether we're doing a variance for
That's the
30
point.
spaces or for 12 spaces, is what you're telling me.
And I would just add that the increased brewery use for this application would generate maybe, well, the business use isn't generating any new employees. The business use isn't generating any new patrons because it's all manufacturing space. And the brewery part of the building, we use the 1 per 1,000 square foot standard, we're talking about needing 5 spaces for that. use is what's driving most of the number. But the operations of the brewery is not gonna increase there's already testimony, they're not hiring 17 new people to work there. They're at capacity in terms of their production, and that's what this is what this is. So, I mean, if the board chooses to think of it as in terms of the 30, I think we provided testimony to cover that. I would argue that we should get counted for the 18, but I would defer to the board on that.
I would prefer, I would support putting the variance in for the 30, because if anything else gets developed along there, we already know that the rest of them are being shared. You know, I mean, because everybody can be counting them 18.
That's another,
You know, I mean, I don't have a problem granting the 30, but I would rather grant the 30 than I would the 12.
Right, I don't,
That's fine, that's fine.
all right, so Bob, do you have any other comments or questions for Jeff? Does anybody on the board have any other questions for Jeff?
I have a question. Regarding the design exception for the parking islands that you mentioned now, the parking islands, that comes from our section 1632 of our ordinance. And one of the goals of that section of our ordinance is to, quote, soften the overall visual impact of the parking lots and to provide shade and reduce heat island effects. Now, are there, absent the parking islands, are there any other design or site features in the parking lot area which would help meet that goal of that?
Yeah, there's already been testimony, there's a couple of things. One is we're planting an excess of shade trees along the parking lot area, which would certainly help with shade and heat effect. The other aspect is that the parking lot itself is going to be permeable, and so the water issue and the heat issue is different than just regular macadam. And I think that helps in terms of that as well. There's existing vegetation, and there will be planting of hedges and shrubbery all around the site, which will contribute to stormwater mitigation in that aspect as well. But the breaking up the parking lot every 10 spaces with planting island, it's very hard to do that on this site, maintain the circulation that we need to for vehicular, and we believe there is adequate vegetation on the site to overall address the concerns that are in the ordinance.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board for Jeff? No. Any other questions from the public?
I'm pleased to hear the number of trees, but I want to know the type, the species.
Is there even testimony to that on from the engineer? I don't have the landscape in front of me. They all conform to the borough's list of approved
Are they deciduous or evergreen?
Along the buffer, they're evergreen trees. Along the perimeter of the buffer, those are evergreen trees.
I'm talking about the ones for the parking lot.
Those are evergreen trees.
Well, I would like to ask for deciduous trees because Brian just read that part of the requirement for the trees is to shade the parking area to address the heat island effect.
And I'm gonna ask Mr. Green because he's got the landscape plan in front of him.
So we are planting, it's a combination of both evergreens and deciduous. The evergreens are gonna be along the property line with the residents to the west of us. And then we have about, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5, 6, 7 deciduous. And there's sweet gums that will be planted along the edge of the parking lot, and those are the larger deciduous.
Yes, I'm familiar. They'll be on the 3 sides of the parking lot, the deciduous trees?
Yes, they're basically along the rear of the parking area. There are 2 towards the building side, and then we have that corner where Reasoner Lane extends to the residence. There's another 2 deciduous trees there.
I just want to make sure that as much of the parking surface is shaded as possible because of the heat island effect in this town, which is quite pronounced.
I'd like to keep down the deer food as well. Because there's a lot of deer, believe it or not, we get deer, they come walking right down to Bangor. Amazing.
Would there be any trees going into the tree banking program because?
I can't hear.
Would there be any trees going into the tree banking program because they're not going into the parking lot?
Well, we're actually
They're over.
we're over on shade trees, so we're not
Okay.
required to commit to conservation. The only thing that we don't have on the literal planting item is a break up the park.
I thought you were over on part, but not in total, but yes, you're over in total, okay.
I just would like to.
Plus, we need to add some of that buffer. Make sure it's within.
Lois, did you have another question?
No, I just want to make sure that as much of the parking surface is shaded as possible. That's my concern.
And I do like that you are doing the permeable pieces. Is there any other questions from the public? Do we summarize the variances before we do comments, or do we do comments before we do the variances?
Do you have any further witnesses?
No, no further witnesses.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have seen, but I don't think that.
Do you want to make a closing statement and then?
In terms of a closing statement, I don't know that, I would make one. In fact, probably the best closing statement was given to you by the planner's testimony. But what I did do is a summary of all the conditions that were discussed at the last meeting, and I went through the variances and the exceptions. I provided that to Mr. Gianos, and I actually circulated a copy of the conditions last Friday to the four professionals, Mr. McManus and Mr. Clerico. There were just so many items that I thought that would be a nice reference for. I can review those quickly.
Yeah, why don't we do that, because you can give the board an outline of what you're going to be asking them to vote on, and it would be very helpful.
Excuse me, Don, do you have a copy of what you say you circulated to us, because I don't recall getting it?
Yeah, there was a clear. I have it, Don.
This extra?
Yes. There you go, Don.
For purposes of the record, the property owner was committing to add signage, no through street, no parking beyond this point, residential use only, at the rear property line adjacent to Reasoner Lane, and that was discussed with Mr. Thompson. Subject to, and if the board were to approve the project and the site filled out, the property owner acknowledged that they had no intention to impede the use of the emergency access at Copper Mine Village, but that it was incumbent upon Copper Mine Village, to the extent that they wanted to prepare and formalize an easement grant to address the existing encroachment that was identified in the plan, to come to the applicant. There was going to be a fence installed 6 foot high, and I understand, please confirm for the record that that discussion with Mr. Thompson did take place and that he was okay with the 6 foot fence.
He was okay with the 6 foot fence.
And that's Mr. Rob Mortera speaking. Syntec or other consistent material at the rear of the applicant's lot, coextensive with the rear property line of lot 21, to terminate at the end of the garage. There's the residence and then the garage behind the residence, which is lot 19, Ken and Deborah Thompson's residence. We talked about the bike rack. There's one at Lone Eagle Brewery, and there's going to be one added at this location. The buffer adjacent to Copper Mine Village and associated landscaping would be reviewed, and the applicant would work cooperatively with the Shade Tree Commission to supplement that and discuss plant selection and planting. Again, Mr. Remortera advised there's a deer issue. We know that. Obviously, working cooperatively with the Shade Tree Commission to get a good planting schedule. And thank you in terms of highlighting those points. I have a business and I own property for a number of years in the borough, and I appreciate that. There would be a detail of patio paving provided. The applicant would locate all ground-based utility equipment in an as-built plan, and that would be provided. All lighting would be placed on a timer to shut off the close of business. At this point in time, it's a little flexible in terms of the food vendors. We just don't know who they're going to be yet. But there's going to be a timer so you don't have lights extending on into night hours. As a condition of approval, there would be a lighting plan submitted to the board planner. In addition, there would be compliance with 7.5 of Beth's report regarding lighting statistics for the parking area, the paved walkways, and any other pedestrian areas, as well as identifying the mounting height for fixtures. We talked about 6.7 report with regard to screen plantings or fencing adjacent to the porch area, and to discuss low-level shrubs that might be there to enhance them and to work cooperatively with the Shade Tree Commission to reach some kind of a mutually acceptable accommodation. 8.1 of Beth's report, the fence would be consistent with the patio enclosure of Lone Eagle Brewery, black powder-coated aluminum fence, and the finish for the pavers would be complementary to the retaining wall and consistent with the Lone Eagle installation. We had talked about bonding and inclusion of language in the resolution with regard to that, and discussed bonding requirements that would be imposed as a part of the application, which conform with the legislation that was signed into law in January of this year, amending what had been the performance guarantee requirements that were enumerated by statute 40:55D-53. Paragraph 4.1 of Beth's report, the cross-access easement, not really something that would apply to the Reasoner Lane residents. From that standpoint, we know this area is being widened twice what it is now. It's going to be improved. We're not looking to have traffic introduced into Reasoner Lane, so really cross-access is not applicable. But to the extent that documentation would be appropriate with the individual lots that are being created here, we're happy to work and cooperate with any of the comments of the professionals and otherwise. Title 39 letter to make that a part of the application. Those are the conditions that I had from last time. If there's anything I missed, please identify.
We normally have just a general condition for outside agency approvals, which is, and then we always have a condition that the plans are going to be revised to the satisfaction of the board's professionals, consistent with the testimony. So those two I would add, and then you're going to go into the variances.
Yes. And then any outside agency approval.
I did, yeah, outside agency approvals, yeah.
Okay.
That's what we were saying, and the plans to be revised to the satisfaction of the board's professionals.
Because there was a number of things in my report about detail to be added, easements, cross-referencing, approval by the borough. There's a whole litany of stuff that's obviously not in your summarized list here, so as long as it's a catch-all, it covers that. I think the only thing in my report that you disagreed with or didn't consent to, and you mentioned it tonight, was the emergency access situation. My comment was to, and I think you said it, you're not going to, and I don't want to go into a 15-minute dissertation on this, but your position is that you're not going to do anything to impede its use, and that's part of the record, that you're not going to do anything that's going to impede its use, but you're not going to do anything in a proactive way to recognize that it's there, and I don't have an issue with that. And the other thing, I'd raised this issue about the power lines and relocating them to back and whatnot. You said it's really going to be up to the power company, and I didn't really hear any input from the board one way or the other on it. And I think at the end of the day, we kind of concurred that it would be the power company who would pretty much decide where they go. So I think those are the only two things in my report that were left a little bit open and that you didn't necessarily consent to. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of little things in here that need to be addressed. As long as Bill's thing covers that, I'm okay with this.
And so then, Don, you're asking for a minor subdivision, right?
Correct.
You're asking for preliminary and final site plan approval. And then you're asking for the design variances that you've outlined in here. So if you just run through them, not specifically, so you have the minimum lot width, right?
Bill,
Yep.
I'm sorry, we needed, just the usual conditions would have just the positive as per balance.
Yes.
You missed that one. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but why don't you start again with the
Hang on a second, let me get that.
Design variance, that's what we want.
See. Okay, so then you have the minor subdivision, the preliminary and final site plan approval, and then the variances. And just generally, they were the minimum lot width, the minimum lot depth, the minimum front yard, the minimum side yard, maximum impervious coverage of 0.86, and then the parking we talked about. We're gonna go for a 30 space parking variance just to be safe, to be more conservative. The maximum number of facade signs, right? 10 for the front and 2 for the rear.
So we're just verifying those signs. that once they're approved, they don't have to come back here again when they change vendors, we're just gonna take the thing off and replace it with.
So we're not putting any restrictions on them.
Right, okay.
The maximum sign area, right, for the front was, 100 allowed and 108.785, proposed.
Correct.
And the rear was, 8 square feet allowed and 22 square feet proposed.
Correct.
But does that include the cut down of the 3 square feet?
No, those are the facade signs. That's
Yeah,
Oh,
not-
the
we have to deal with
facade
the
signs.
directory,
I'm sorry.
directory sign.
We're not on
Directory
that
size,
yet.
I'm still confused.
I jumped ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a little assistance from Mr. Cucci myself. There were, and I think the Morteros also want to add their comment. There were 2 directory signs,
Correct.
and the total square footage for one sign, which was on the food court sign.
It's actually inches, because
Yeah, directory.
1,260 square inches.
1260 was the proposed number.
It's for one.
1,260 square inches proposed, and the variance would be 684 square inches for the food court sign. And then we agreed that we were gonna reduce the other sign down to 3 square feet total.
And Mr. Mortero, do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
So the rear directory sign, 1,260 square inches is proposed, how much is allowed?
784.
576 square feet, square inches.
576 square inches allowed.
Correct.
And that gives you 685 square inch variance. And then the other one is how much?
It's actually, what do we wanna call this, a directory sign?
The amended sign?
You said you
I
wanted to
don't
call
think
it
that's
facade sign.
yeah, I think
Facade
it's facade sign, cause you're not gonna list
say
all the
facade
various
sign.
tenants.
So then
Yeah.
it'd be 3 square foot facade sign on the rear.
Okay.
So then we would ask for variance of 25.
25 square feet. where
25
eight-
square feet.
Where 8 is.
Correct.
Okay, so wait, rear facade sign,
A
right?
third rear facade
So
sign.
there'd be a total of 3.
Rear facade,
What was the square footage of that one?
3 square feet.
3 square feet.
where, how much is allowed?
8 is allowed and 25 is proposed.
8,
This is really like a do not enter kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
loan, it was loan zoning.
You don't think they need a directory?
okay, and then the minimum loading, space sizes, that's the variance for that. And then you had the design waivers that they went to, shade tree plantings, non-conforming use buffer berm, parking island width and location, minimum buffer of parking area, filtered buffer of parking areas, maximum vertical illumination, maximum illumination for vehicular use, maximum illumination for general parking pedestrian areas, and average pedestrian way illumination, and those were the design waivers.
Did you do the lighting on the signs?
That's what
The,
this is.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the lighting for the parking lot, but the lighting on the signs doesn't require it. It's conforming. The parking lot and sidewalk is where it goes slightly above standard.
Did you mention the berm?
Yes,
I didn't hear, I'm sorry.
yes.
You mentioned it, but did Bill mention it?
Yes, you did.
I could-
It's exception
That's what I
B.
didn't hear.
Yep.
Okay, so that's what they're asking for, there are no variances. And so if someone wanted to make a motion to approve the,
Well, you were just talking that we might want to do it for preliminary and final, first, the materials on the elevations, we may wanna see those come back. We haven't seen any materials.
We're gonna
That's
pass on that
important.
with permit, right?
the board generally, or in the past, because we had problems in the past where people got approved and they said they were gonna put some sort of base on there and it wound up being vinyl siding. So we generally had, samples of siding and roofing materials so that the construction department could know what we approved, but that was what we.
Well, we had talked about, you know, we had made some suggestions on the elevations, and we didn't see any specific materials, so.
Well, plans have to come in for building permit.
Right, so.
Well, one, you have control over building permit, but you also know that they're gonna complement the Lone Eagle property. You
But
already
the
know.
architecture should be amended pursuant to somebody's approval. It can't be the construction official that wasn't part of this hearing.
Exactly.
So if there's design changes, like, for example, you reference the small base course on the building, recommended that be taller and do something to differentiate, but still have a complementary design between the two buildings. So whether that's alternative design for cupolas, additional cupolas, something along those lines.
Can't that be handled by the board's
Signage.
professionals?
Yeah, so that's.
You know, what the signage is gonna, what the things are gonna look like, I mean, you know.
We've trusted Beth to do this in the
Yeah,
past, if she's fine with that, I'm fine with that.
I'm
But
comfortable.
I can't speak for the rest of the board, since I was the one that was the stickler about the elevation.
As long as there's language in the condition of approval that states the architecture shall be amended to accomplish something with examples given, for example, I'm comfortable with that. I just need some guidance rather than architectural amendments as approved by the board of planners.
But the testimony given was that if the facade and the materials are matching the existing living building, and if you need to prove that it matches.
No, I think they should be different, the design.
Yeah, well, we're looking for just a little
differentiated.
more oomph, and I think that was my comment, was that, you know, it needs to,
More texture.
it needs to have a little more character, and I think, we'd be better off for it.
Yeah, but we're not directing, we're not
Yeah, we're
directing
not-
specific,
No.
but
No.
don't you understand
I think I
the direction
understand.
that
You
the board's
understand the
taking?
feeling we're looking for.
Yes, my only point is I want that feeling transcribed into a sentence or two in the condition so that I can point to something. But even absent that, I understand this, but I think for the record, we need something in writing.
Okay, so how do we translate Susan's feelings into a sentence or two?
Does this do it? If the archway to the entrance to the building, if that's stone, does that give enough pop?
You know,
We're trying to
I'm
keep the
hesitant
village look
to,
the same.
I'm hesitant to put my own architectural design on a building, you know, so, but if the architect is proposing that's a, you know, one solution to the, I don't think it's just one thing that you can do, like, let's pop some brick on the building, but, you know, yes, that would be beneficial, but I think you would do yourself a favor by, you know, maybe like we said, varying the colors of the siding in some places, or, you know, beefing up that little tiny 18-inch, wainscot with some, other, you know, some additional veneer of some sort. I mean, I think, honestly, I think that's I don't feel comfortable telling an architect what their design should be. I don't
It's
think that's my
difficult to
place.
do without changing the footprint too.
Yeah, we've moved this building and we've.
No, I'm not suggesting you change the
Yeah,
footprint.
yeah, it's hard to.
We're trying to keep the same look as the building next door, and I haven't heard anybody say they didn't like the way the Lone Eagle look.
Like I said, I mean, if the board just wants to say, hey, put some brick veneer on the arch and raise the wainscot, another foot, I'm fine
Can I ask
with
it
that,
this way, if the building is as it is on these drawings, absent Ms. Englehart's comments, do other folks on the board?
Veneer.
Why don't we do this?
I don't think, I'm
Okay,
not an
let's-
architect,
let's-
but I think she's trying to get rid of that strip center look.
Yeah,
Here's an idea,
it's-
here.
It looks like a strip center. Kind of a, everything is.
This arch is a little bit, it's not really part of this, it's not flush. So how about in here, inside, we go stone all the way, and here we do a different type of, they have like an architectural vinyl shingle that almost looks like saw cuts. Or you could even have them where they look like scallops, but I put them on my house, they're
We're
like,
not going scallops, it's not a Victorian.
well, I'm
It's not a
just
Victorian.
throwing different See, this is something we do all the time.
Well, and you see
No, I designed the
why,
building.
you see why I don't think it's fair for me
Yeah.
to dictate your design, but I do think that we should increase the brick veneer and perhaps vary the colors. Is that specific enough
But
for
if you-
Beth to be able to
Yeah.
give you feedback?
Can we identify it as there's gonna be added emphasis to the building entrance, the primary building entrance
Yes.
along Stangle? We're gonna increase the use of stone veneer on the building, including
front.
General.
potentially including the building archway, and we're going to vary the colors of the building facade.
If that's something
And
that.
or
that's
vary.
But I wanna keep the same color as Lonevo, I don't really,
I don't think there's a
don't wanna change
suggestion.
different
I'm
color siding.
no, in fact, I specifically said that
Never done none of that.
it should work together. So, but if changing the color palette helps your design, make that proposal to Beth. If it doesn't, that's fine too.
And I think that's why we wanna include the words and or, like maybe after your architect has an opportunity to look at these, he says, the stone veneer along the building entrance is really not the right way to go, but if we added a different color to this, that would really make it pop and accomplish the boards. I want that flexibility, actually, I want your architect to have that flexibility to use his creative talents to improve the appearance of the building, rather than us dictating in short order, the architectural changes. I think it's gonna work out to your benefit and then to the board's and the community's benefit.
We have a condition that says plans to be revised to the satisfaction of the board engineer, planner, and traffic engineer, and so.
The problem with that is that if it's unclear, then.
But we're gonna be here until tomorrow to try and decide how we're gonna redesign the
We've done
facade of
this
this
so many
building.
times where we really trust Beth. Take one more pass at your elevation and keep it up a bit.
Can I just propose a condition and see if we can, the architectural plans shall be amended to enhance the prominence of the building entrance along Stangle, to increase the stone building material along the building, and or amend the colors of the building so as to improve the architectural appearance to the approval of the board's planner. Sorry, I know that was a little long-winded as I'm trying to come up with it, but basically improve the architectural appearance, identifying those three things and or to my approval.
Well, reasonable satisfaction.
Reasonable, yeah, that's fine, reasonable satisfaction.
Let's go slowly. Architectural plans could be amended to enhance the entrance on Stengel by increasing the use of, what?
Enhance the building appearance by increasing the prominence of the building entrance.
Yeah.
Increasing the use of stone along the building facade, and or changing colors.
And color,
And
they can
color.
use the same color, but just use it in red instead of.
And I want and or to give everybody flexibility to be creative about it rather than not just check the box.
We don't wanna tie your hands and we don't wanna add, significant cost. We just want you guys to take a
We got
look
buildings
at
on
it.
the road that are blocked, we gotta, we're gonna do a nice job,
The architect asked me.
I'll address that. But, again, you're asking for preliminary and final, and normally we have a whole color board with all the materials and yada, yada, yada. We know exactly what everything's gonna look like, so.
So we're letting you
We
get
are
away with
giving
this.
you artistic ability with some input, so.
I
think that's very reasonable.
I'll let Peter come up with something that
Yeah.
will try to
Work with that.
I move it.
Can we close?
Yeah, let's
Before we
just
procedurally, I think we should
Yeah,
close the
yeah.
public hearing.
Hold on a minute. Kim had a question.
There hasn't been any
Well, we
public
can,
on that.
Yeah,
We haven't
we haven't had, we're not done yet. Kim had a question.
I just wanna ask you, do you think your issue is more with the facade of the building or with the lettering of the sign?
No, it's just it's the facade.
The facade?
Yeah.
We wanna take public comment, please.
Yes, thank you. I tried to do that before. Okay, so do we have any comments from the board? Comments from the consultants?
no.
Comments from the public?
Lois Stewart, I just wanna say thank you to this applicant because he seems to be so receptive to trying to do a building that's going to be an improvement to our community. And it's nice to have that kind of an applicant to listen to. And like, I loved it when you said there won't be any signs talking about towing my car away.
Park in a parking slot.
So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that it's nice to have somebody who's receptive to suggestions.
Any other public comments? Okay, now can we move to close the public hearing?
I'll second.
Any opposed? Okay, now, somebody.
Now I'll move
Okay,
to adopt all those.
so granted,
And it's preliminary.
I'll second.
Two trees or something.
Ms. Milby? Yes. Mrs. Stewart?
Yes.
Ms. Fleur?
Yes.
Mayor Ryan? Mrs. Engelhardt?
Yes, I told him.
Yes. Mr. Budden?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Just go.
We're talking, we're still looking at the building. I missed the punchline.
Oh, wow.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 5. Phil, do you have any council items you want to discuss? Item number 6 is chair item. There isn't anybody here to make any comments, correct? Okay, our next meeting is August 28th. Do we have anything on the agenda?
The McDonald's, completeness, and I am expecting actually from Mr. Pickering another application to be dropped off tomorrow, for a
For what, I mean?
And that would be completeness.
For what?
And I received that
We
tomorrow.
can't hear over here what
Do
it
you
is.
know what address it is?
It's a two-family, like a two-bed duplex.
Where is it?
Okay, let me just,
Not in yet.
It's not in yet.
let me just repeat that for Lois, because she couldn't hear.
There might be 2 completeness items only for the August 28th.
One is a possible application that hasn't even been submitted yet, and the other is the McDonald's. So that's,
What does McDonald's want to do?
We have the plans inside, if you would take a look at them during the time of the, sometime during the week.
I think it's just a site plan.
It's just a completeness only at this point, so McDonald's.
Yeah, I have one other chair item that's
And
really,
then some other
really
circulation
important, and that is
changes.
we all need to congratulate Brian on his passing his, planning license. Because that was one of the
Plans that closely involved.
Congratulations, Brian, you really deserve it, it's a huge accomplishment, especially when you take the test with a fever. Right, exactly. Everybody see the bills that were passed around earlier?
Yes.
It's so nice.
Lois, everything you say is getting
I'll
recorded.
second.
That's all right, I just said it's right next to the tree.
Yes. Mayor Ryan?
Yes.
Mrs. Milky? Mrs. Engelhardt?
Yes.
Mrs. Picker? Mr. Perry? Yes. Mr. Budden?
Share with the public.
Yes.
And I don't think we have any, I'm sorry, no?
Bob's.
I don't have any reason to go into executive session, I don't know why that's on the agenda.
It's on every agenda.
It's
It's on every agenda.
It is, I can't think of anything we need today. And so I guess that's it, can we have a motion to?
Second.
All in favor?